Okay, we are all set.
Great. Welcome to our City Council meeting on the 6th of December. Let us call to order. I'm going to start out with the Pledge of Allegiance, and our Vice Mayor Ortiz will start us with that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. Megan, can we have roll call, please?
Yes, Councilmember Beach.
Here.
Councilmember Colston.
Here.
Councilmember Brownrigg.
Here.
Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Here.
Mayor O'Brien.
Here. We are all accounted for. To our city attorney, we did have a closed session.
There was no reportable action tonight, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. In regard to upcoming events, I have a couple of announcements. The Parks and Recreation Department is implementing a new and improved registration system just in time for winter registration. You can visit the city's website to find a link to create a new account in advance of the winter registration, which actually begins on the 14th of December at 8 o'clock in the morning. The Parks and Recreation Department is hosting the second annual holiday home decorating contest. All winter holidays are encouraged, and there are 4 fun categories to win. You need to register by December 13th. Once all the entries have been received, a map will be posted to our website so everyone can enjoy a festive tour around the town this holiday season. So if you want any more details or want to register, please visit www.burlingame.org/holiday-home. I just wanted to mention that the library board has 1 vacant seat. The term expires on June 20th, 23. Applications are due on the 29th of December. There is also an opening on the Planning Commission. That term expires on April 7th, 2024, and applications are due by December 17th. And final announcement that I wanted to mention is the Park and Rec has the Burlingame Gazette, which has the most current information on senior events. And so if you're interested in receiving it, please send an email to cfuhrman@burlingame.org, or you can actually call the Burlingame Rec Center at 650-558-7300 to actually get the Gazette mailed to you in case you don't have a computer or laptop. Is there anyone else that would like to add any upcoming events that I may have missed? No? Okay. So we will go on to presentations. We have 2 presentations this evening. So we are actually going to start out with the Peninsula Humane Society. And I think we have Anthony Tanzimore present to do the presentation. Am I correct in that pronunciation?
I have just promoted him to panelist, so he'll be joining us.
Let me, now hopefully you can see me. Good evening, it's great to be with you all. I have been in this role for 1 year and 1 month, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for me, after spending a lot of time getting to understand the organization and the community, to come and introduce myself to you. I've met with Councilman Brownrigg and City Manager Goldman before, but have not. This is the first opportunity to meet with the rest of the City Council. I'm glad to be with you. I am going to share my screen. I have a short presentation. here. Well, I'm not quite sure how to make this work.
Megan, is there a way that he can send it to you and then you can put it on the screen if he's unable to? There we are. We got it.
There we are. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Technology and I are not the best of friends. But, you know, by way of introduction, I grew up in the East and went to college in the West and back East to law school and came here to the Bay Area about 20 years ago. And I've spent the bulk of my professional life in the nonprofit sector and serving nonprofits and foundations as a consultant for the last 15 years. And then I came here as I was introduced first as a candidate to Peninsula Humane Society. I thought that what this organization needed was a steward rather than a change maker, because it's such a strong organization with a strong reputation in the community, a solid organization, and that has proved to be the case. One of the first things I did when I came here was to dig into the dusty old archives and look through all the articles written on PHS going back to its founding in 1950. And it was started by a group of concerned citizens who wanted the community to be more involved in animal control. And we've been running animal control and sheltering services for the county and the 20 cities in the county since 1952. As I talk to people, I make it clear to people I talk to that we are your local organization that serves the animals in the community. When people tell me that, oh, I give to the SPCA or I give to the Humane Society, and we look them up in the directory, we don't see their names, and I'll say you must have contributed to the national organizations, and we are unaffiliated with those national organizations. They come here to fundraise, but they have no local programs. Just to make that clear for everyone. So we have 3 locations. Our Coyote Point shelter just off 101 in San Mateo and Airport Road. It opened in March of 2020. And we are very happy to be in that shelter. And we run our contract funded services out of there, the vaccination clinic, lost and found, our spay and neuter, which is privately funded, but it's run from that facility. And where I am here in Burlingame, the Tom and Annette Lantos Center for Compassion, we just celebrated in September 10 years. This building opened in 2011, and it still feels like a new building. And our third is our resale shop on Chula Vista, just off Broadway. And you will likely not invite me back to speak to you again when I do what I'm about to do and say, you can go there and find your Christmas presents for the year. It's a great place to shop. Now, briefly, and I can send this to City Manager Goldman to share with the council members. But these are the services, an overview of the services that are funded through the contract with the county. And we spent a good deal of time with both police departments, with city managers and the county staff to hone in on the priority responses and response times to activities that occur in the communities. And so as you see as priority 1, we will respond within an hour to all those calls where a human being is under imminent threat from an animal, be it domestic or wild, or where a dog has bitten a person, or an animal has been severely injured. or in many cases, in some communities throughout the county that have mountain lions, we will respond to a request from the public safety officers on site, and require a request that the Fish and Wildlife Service come on site to help dispense with that mountain lion. Priority 2 calls are those calls we respond within 4 hours where an animal's sick or suffered an injury, or somebody calls us and says that the animal is confined. Priority 3, those are animals where we get calls all the time that an animal's been struck, it's lying out, dead animals in the street, and we'll respond to those, or where there has been an animal bite and an animal needs to be quarantined. And we'll respond to those within 18 hours. And within 24 hours, if someone sees a stray animal in the neighborhood, we'll respond to those. And if we're not responding to any of these previous 4 categories of calls, our officers, animal control officers, will patrol county parks and recreation areas. Other services, just briefly, we're open. We operate 24/7, 365. So we have staff on site to respond to lost and found, abandoned animal calls. The shelter is open 7 days a week, 11 to 7 during the week, 11 to 6 on weekends. And we try to make ourselves accessible as much as possible to when people need help. So our animal care technicians are on site 24 hours a day, and we provide medical care to animals that need it. Lost and found information line is always open. We have at the Coyote Point shelter areas on the outside of the building where people who find animals can leave them in these lockers, and the lockers are checked constantly, and we get quite a number of animals that are left there through the night. Something else that I'm particularly proud of is our work to train staff and volunteers to help in the event of disasters. We have a group of trailers that we have outfitted for disaster response, and we just a couple of weeks ago ran trainings for our volunteers. And our privately funded services mainly run from the Lantos Center here, with the exception of cruelty investigations. We investigate hundreds and hundreds of cases each year of animal cruelty, and take quite a number to the district attorney's office. And a number of them go on to be prosecuted. Our adoption center is located here at the Lantos Center. Our spay and neuter clinic, as I said before, is at the Coyote Point Center, and we provide affordable, low-cost surgeries. We also have a free mobile clinic that we take to certain locations throughout the year, and we're hoping to bring that back soon. Wildlife Center is here on the second floor of the Lantos Center, and citizens bring in thousands and thousands of injured animals throughout the year, and we take care of them in our hospital on the second floor. I'm very proud of our volunteer program with 1,200 volunteers. I think I must have met almost all of them in the year that I've been here. And the other day over the weekend, we had an event where we brought in a number of our volunteers who hadn't seen the Coyote Point shelter. We took them on tours of the shelter. Humane education is a huge part of what we do as a humane society, and We, for several years, have been running during the summer a series of animal camps. And this past summer, we were able to bring them back live. So we brought young kids to the Lantos Center where they heard presentations on how to care for certain animals, and they got to experience animals, live animals here. And we provide, we have a free hotline for people who are having difficulty with their animals, and they can call and get assistance. We have training classes that people can sign up for. They're well subscribed now. We thought at the during the heart of the pandemic that once the world opened up again, that we would see animals return to the shelter, but that hasn't been the case. What has been the case is that people are calling for training classes because their pets have been at home with them during the pandemic, and they're unsocialized, and so they're coming here to get help with that. And finally, our TAILS program, which is transitioning animals to loving homes. It's our partnership with the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. We're very proud of that. The sheriff is proud of this program as well. And we take a number of dogs to the jail where they live with the inmates for 8 weeks. And we have staff who go over once a week and train the inmates on caring for the animals. And we have a graduation service, and then the dogs are put up for adoption after that. So that's a very quick and brief overview of who we are and what we do. I invite you to come over anytime to either the Lantos Center or the Coyote Point shelter. Invite you to call me if you have questions about anything, or if the citizens of Burlingame have questions. So I've probably exceeded my time, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. I love the Peninsula Humane Society. I brought my dogs there for training classes over the years. So I appreciate all that you offer. I mean, it's just such a wonderful experience for adults and kids that visit there, and they do a wonderful, they're just a wonderful addition to our community. So thank you, and also welcome, because I have not met you in person. So I hope to do that in the near future.
Thank you very much. We're very proud to be part of this community. So,
very good.
Very nice.
Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll try to be quick. But one, I want to thank you for putting this on the schedule. This is a wonderful presentation in the holiday season. It's nothing but a feel-good story and all the good work that you guys do at PHS. Number two, I can't remember if Mayor O'Brien was with me on the Planning Commission when we approved this, but it was a lot of work. There was a certain amount of pushback from some of the neighbors. I think they're all extremely happy now. You guys have been just a great addition, and I really feel that we're blessed in Burlingame to have you and have the Lantos Center here. I have to personally thank you. My wife and my son both volunteer, and they have gotten so much joy out of working with the dogs and with all of the staff, but especially with the animals. So that's just great. And I'm going to finish with my holiday hot tip for my colleagues. If you have men in your life and you're looking for a nice gift, PHS has a wonderful dark blue t-shirt that says, "In dog beers, I've only had one," which I really like. Thank you very much, Mr. Tansomore, for all
Thank
your
you.
work.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Councilmember Beach.
Thanks. Just want to echo the same sentiments. We're so proud to have you in Burlingame. It's an amazing, well, all your facilities are amazing, but just again, a shout out for the opportunities for volunteers to engage. What a great way to educate the community on your mission, and humane education is just amazing. The programs that you folks have. And again, I would echo, it's meant a lot to my family. It's taught my teen a lot about responsibility and the joy. It certainly helps the animals, but doing that cat TLC brings so much joy right back as well. In fact, I was in there doing some cat TLC in October with my daughter, and it's just so much fun. And I look forward to seeing you around. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
for having such a great organization.
Thank you.
Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you. Love it. I want to come over, say hello, but I'm afraid if I do, I'm going to end up with 5 cats. So, but we have not volunteered, but we have been recipients of animals. I have a one-eyed black cat that lives between my house and my neighbor's, who came from your place. You saved him by operating and taking one of his eyes out when he had a massive infection. And I ended up adopting him, and we've loved all of our pets that we've gotten from there. So if someone's thinking about a nice holiday addition to their family, I would suggest going to look at some of the animals and see if that might make a good holiday present.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much again. And I'm sure
Thank
you'll
you.
be seeing all of us at some point.
Yes, please do. And give me a call. I'll be happy to take you on a tour.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That concludes our first presentation. Our second presentation will be the North Rollins Road Specific Plan Update, and Director Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor O'Brien and members of the council, and allow me to just get ourselves situated here. There we go. So we're really pleased to have the opportunity to provide the City Council with an update of the North Rollins Road Specific Plan. When the city was adopting its general plan back in 2019, I think the Rollins Road mixed use area really captured the imagination of a lot of people. It was really this chance to have a whole new neighborhood for Burlingame, and also an opportunity to blend both existing industrial uses with new residential uses and create something just altogether different from anywhere else here in town. We've been grateful to have Mayor O'Brien as well as Councilmember Coulson as the council subcommittee leading this effort. And then with us this evening for this presentation are John Moreland and Andrew Levins from KTGY. They are the consultants that were retained to assist with putting together the specific plan. Also Linda Gates, Dana Falk, and Casey Case from Gates and Associates, which they're the landscape architects on the team, and Mike Mowry from Kimley Horn. So the purpose is to update the City Council on the project status, and I believe Linda Gates will go through the steps that we've gone through to get from here to there. We did start the plan right as the pandemic started and had to do a little bit of shuffling and recalibration to switch to a virtual format, but it's worked quite well. And we've received a lot of great input and are now at the place where we do have a preferred concept and an administrative draft that staff is reviewing. So without further ado, I will like to hand over to Linda Gates, the next part of the presentation.
Well, thank you, Kevin. But first, on behalf of the whole team, I really want to acknowledge how much we appreciate the forward thinking of the City Council in designating this live work zone and diligent efforts of the staff to sort of help us imagine this transformation where we recreate North Rollins. So I have to acknowledge that. And so tonight, very briefly, we're going to just sort of share at a very high level some of the activities to date, assessments and policy review and community outreach, which has led us to create some project principles that have been guiding us and develop alternatives in which some preferred concepts are emerging. So we wanted to kind of update you on that, and then sort of the schedule and where we're going from here. So next slide. I think you recall, any successful specific plan really needs to be an outgrowth of community input. And so we really wanted to make sure that we had the local, really sort of stakeholders in that area we heard from them. We set up a CAC committee comprised of many of the local business owners and special interests there. We set up a technical advisory committee to make sure that some of the public works and streets, sort of infrastructure issues were getting dealt with. We've met with the Planning Commission. We've held a number of community meetings. We first started in September of 2020 to sort of find out people's vision for the area. And then in January, we came back with some alternatives to select a preferred concept. We heard very consistent themes across these different groups, wanting it to preserve that sort of quirky industrial feel, wanting it to be a walkable environment, connections to the transit, a lot of discussion about art and placemakers and things like that. So those kind of ideas that were coming out of these community outreach led to the creation of the project principles, which KTGY John is going to sort of walk through and share with you.
Thank you very much, Linda. On this slide are the key principles for the North Rollins specific plan. These principles have been derived from the great feedback that we've heard from the community over the course of the project. And they include creating a new mixed-use neighborhood that retains and blends existing uses with new development. So really to allow for an organic evolution of the area. Also nurturing community connections via a framework of open spaces that are accessible and multifunctional. We've heard throughout this outreach process that we wanted these open spaces to not only function for recreation purposes, but also possibly for performances, fairs, and to really have multiple uses. We want the specific plan to promote environmentally friendly and economically sustainable development and infrastructure, celebrating North Rollins' industrial character and the unique history of the area, as well as promoting local businesses and community organizations, and creating opportunities for art, and as well as having a smooth transition between the planned area and South Rollins Road. Slide, please. After the principles were formed to help kind of guide the plan, our team created alternatives that really focus on 5 key variables that you see here. One of them was the land use. It was more of a refinement of the existing North Rollins Road mixed use zone. And focus areas, like really looking at what areas have a unique context, and that could really be a focus area in the specific plan area. And then also highlighting North Rollins Road and Adrian Roads, the main backways and travel ways of the specific plan area. And then open spaces, really trying to create a public realm and having these connect to each other, as well as create recreation and multi-use facilities. And then also we do have a utility easement area, as well as the constraints that that area includes. Next slide, please. Then after reviewing input on the alternatives, we did create this focus area concept, which essentially breaks down the specific plan area into 6 different areas. Area 1 is in the northeast, it's adjacent to the 101 freeway. Area 2 is to the west and is adjacent to the Caltrain right away. And area 3 is the Rollins Road corridor adjacent to the El Portal Channel at the city limits. We envision this area to essentially be the core commercial and mixed use area of the specific plan. And then area 4 to the southwest, adjacent to the Windrow. Area 5 is the utility easement, including the drainage and utility constraints that that area has. And then area 6 is the southeast area, which will essentially transition to Rollins Road to the south. Next slide, please. And then right now our team is working on finalizing the specific plan, which will include subjective and objective design standards and development standards. And 4 key elements that we just wanted to focus on for this presentation is urban design, really looking at open spaces, streetscape, landscape amenities, such as benches and artwork, and how all those will interact together. And also including site and building guidelines, really focusing on the street scene along Rollins Road and Adrian Road, and how the mix of residential, live work, commercial, industrial uses would function. And then looking at the focus areas, tailoring urban design or urban design criteria to the different plan areas. And then of course also including sustainable elements for the specific plan area. And then after this, I'll transition over to Mike Mowry of Kimley Horn, who will talk about right-of-way. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So our task was really to look at the infrastructure in the specific plan area. And tonight I'll talk a little bit specifically about the transportation infrastructure. We focused a lot of this effort on the two main roadways that serve the area, Rollins Road and Adrian. And while we worked with each of the groups that Linda mentioned earlier, I would say two options came forward as preferred. One is very similar to what's in the city's bike plan today, which would be bike lanes along Rollins Road and potentially narrowing the travel lanes. And the second was really to have more of a dedicated bike facility and allow pedestrians to have their own dedicated sidewalk facility adjacent to the roadway. The second alternative I just described really came throughout the process as a preferred alternative for a couple of reasons. One is that it does allow for a continuous bike facility for kind of the longer bike travel along the corridor. It does again separate bicycles and pedestrians, which was a note that a number of residents or maybe future residents made. It does also allow flexibility for those pedestrian areas to be widened along Rollins Road itself as different developments come in, and if those developments would like to dedicate additional frontage to that pedestrian facility. And then the last is it really provides a lot of flexibility. So as you can see in the diagram at the lower right, at the intersections, we're able to do some narrowing and allow for a better pedestrian crossing experience, but still retain the on-street parking that's there today. And then lastly, this concept is able to hold the curb-to-curb distance that's there today. So this can be implemented a couple blocks at a time. It would need to be implemented pretty holistically because we have the bikeway on the west side of the roadway. I do want to note we have interacted with the city of Millbrae as they continue to refine the BART area plan. And this plan really speaks well to their plans as well. They see Adrian as, and then the undercrossing into the Millbrae station area is really the primary bike facility into this area. And they too see I think generally a bi-directional route on one side of the street. And so this concept that's shown here is preferred. It really connects well with their plan. Next slide, please. We went through a similar process with Adrian Road, but ultimately settled on that this facility likely will have less bicycle travel, at least volume of bicycle travel, but we really wanted to improve the streetscape, the pedestrian experience. And so you see more landscape treatment that is there today, that is not there today, excuse me, with removal of parking. This does, though, however, retain slightly wider vehicular travel lanes so that those can be shared for both vehicles and bicyclists for those that do choose to bike on Adrian Road. With that, I'd like to turn over to my other partner to finish the presentation.
So, of course, I think the most important part of any project is the open space framework, where we are able to link all the disparate parts together, particularly where you have different uses and different architectural characters. And this emerged in all the community outreach is a really important theme as well. So what emerged was sort of this mixture of different approaches to the open space, all of which featured walkability and creating place through the open space system with sort of divine gateways and clear spines and such that people could use so that we began to create sort of a distinct identity of the area. So there were three sort of guiding principles of the open space framework. One is having the two parallel north-south spines, one Rollins Road, which would be sort of activated and active for sort of moving pedestrian kind of movements and plaza spaces in that sort of more urban active corridor, and then using the utility easement for a sort of more pastoral spine with sort of more contemplative recreation events along that. We wanted to create a park cluster using 4 parks, 2 of which are already currently planned with impending residential development, and adding 2 more. So you have this sort of 4 quadrants of parks. So there was within 5 minutes of walking for any of the people residing in the live work area, there's a park. And each one of the parks would have different activities and amenities provided in that. So they form sort of a park cluster together. You move from one to the other. And then the third part of this is really creating these cross-axis paseo systems that link all the area together. Once again, emphasizing the walkability and also using the eucalyptus grove that's right along the edge of the train tracks, creating sort of a trail system with there. So it's really this exciting kind of dynamic place where everybody sort of shares the open space system. Next slide. So just to sort of share where we're going from here. So we've developed these concepts, and right now we're working with the staff to refine sort of the draft specific plan. Once we have this developed, we'll be going back to the CAC to sort of get their thoughts and input on it, the Technical Advisory Committee, posting it on the website so the community can chime in, and then bringing a draft back to you to look at the draft of the specific plan and design guidelines. So we're hoping to have that happening in spring, so this is my early Christmas present to you that you can unwrap for Easter, and moving forward with it. And that's all we've got for you tonight.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to know if my colleagues have any questions or comments. Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. That's very exciting to see that all kind of start to come together. It's really, really great to go from rezoning to where we are now. But what scares me about this whole thing is that it seems to be moving a lot quicker than we are. Every time any of those buildings go into contract, it's one lost opportunity to create any new green zone or any other uses that we want in that area. And so it just makes me very nervous. And I think we need to start trying to identify some locations or some places where we want green space so that we can act on it before somebody else does. But thank you for the presentation. Like I said, very exciting. Look forward to Easter.
Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I really appreciate this update. I likewise think this is a crucial and very exciting endeavor by the city to create a whole new neighborhood. I have just a couple of questions. One, I really appreciate reaching out to the public, of course, and that's super helpful. But, the public does not have, by and large, urban design experience. And so to me, the transition of a district from one use to an entirely different use, especially one that becomes residential, must bring with it expertise where this has happened elsewhere in the country. And so I wonder what resources the consultants bring, what resources we've been able to tap from around the country what makes for successful transitions like this. And you don't need to, I'd like to know that there's been something. I'd love to read it, but mostly I just want to know that we've availed ourselves of those kind of lessons and not just relied on the public to figure it out.
So, John, do you want to chat with that a little bit? Because even in the beginning, we talked about references that people wanted to use, and when go look at like Dog Patch and stuff, other places that transformed, and even exploring their references. But John can share with you some of the places that KTGY is currently working on with that kind of transformation too.
Yes, and thank you for that question, because it is very important to have the proper transitions between residential and other uses. So we are a architectural and a planning firm. So we do have experience designing residential and mixed use buildings across the country. So some of the key elements that we really looked at and that have been spoken to us is like the funk zone kind of in Santa Barbara, how you kind of have a transition from kind of an industrial to kind of more of a resort kind of destination area. There's been some comments about a lower kind of intensity version of the arts district in Los Angeles as well too. And really kind of looking at what's going to be included in the specific plan is really going to be looking at some of the transitions, not only just setbacks, but also how to kind of design separation between existing industrial and new residential uses. And that'll be included as part of the specific plan.
If I could, Mr. Moreland, and I don't want to hog the mic, but I do have a couple of questions. So I'm not concerned about the interface between what will be industrial and now is residential. I understand that that transition is important too, but actually what I mean is what makes a neighborhood. So for example, not listed on the 8 core principles was a supermarket. Now, many of our neighborhoods in Burlingame don't have a supermarket within walking distance, but most of our neighborhoods in Burlingame feel organic to the city, and this one is going to be removed. And so should we think about encouraging a supermarket so you don't have a food desert over there? That's the kind of it. So by transition, I meant, how do we make sure it's a successful neighborhood, that it doesn't feel like an afterthought or just where, you know, people who can only be in apartments live? That's the goal, is to make this feel like it's been there as long as every house in Burlingame, if you see what I'm saying. So let me ask the question specifically about retail. Should retail exist in this district to make it feel like a neighborhood? And if so, how do we make that happen?
Definitely, and it's really no secret too that also, especially with the pandemic, that the retail experience is really changing.
Right.
But however, what is staying with retail and what our experience is showing is that people want to go for kind of an experiential component, food component, grocery components. Those are still key components that really kind of create place. And one of the core areas that we're going to have along the Rollins Road corridor is there's essentially will be kind of a commercial requirement for retailers that kind of go in there. And then on top of that as well too, there will be certain design criteria and also additional provisions that will not just look at just the space itself, but really additional allowances to really kind of create that sense of place. Really encouraging art, street performances, outdoor dining, and really kind of using the specific plan and the design components as really kind of a tool to help encourage that.
Okay. I'm just going to flip through a couple of others and then I'll quit. So on the parks, love the network of parks. Am I right in thinking that except for the utility park, all of those are privately developed? Is that right? I mean, yes. And so how do we make sure that they stay open to the public? Is that part of the permit process, that that they feel like they're part of the neighborhood, not just belonging to this apartment block?
So the preferred direction will be, and so one of the parks that's already being developed was private developed, but open for public use. The second one is actually being private developed and then dedicated to the city as a public park. And we think that's a better model. So the way we're setting up in the future is it's privately developed, dedicated, and then the city programs it, maintains it, operates, and such like that, so that we have that level of control and recreation evolves over 10, 20 years. So the city can come in and adapt things that a private developer wouldn't be able to do. So yes, it becomes public because it's so critical. It's so critical.
Right. That's terrific. I'm delighted that we may move to a model where it actually gets dedicated to the city for activation. And if we have to maintain them, I still think it's worth it. Has any thought been given to building a pedestrian bridge from this neighborhood over to the California side of the tracks?
Mike, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that's question is for me. Thank you, Councilman Brownrigg. We did look at that, and we do have concepts on the project webpage that were developed. Very preliminary concepts, obviously. I would say it's the separation because of the BART right-of-way and Caltrain is more significant than a lot of residents would consider. And so likely the easier model to adapt may be a tunnel rather than a bridge. And obviously there's a lot of trade-offs with both of those facilities. But we did provide a schematic or concept of what that may look like. We also did look at a cost, and it is pretty extensive.
Yeah,
I think I'll add.
You
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, after you, Kevin. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, the cost is significant. One wrinkle we hadn't really thought of until we had a meeting with the school district last week. How do the kids in this area get to school? That undercrossing may be useful if, for example, the students are assigned to Franklin. That actually becomes part of a route, and maybe there's a safe route to school funding or something like that that could help. I think we had thought of it more as just wanting to connect neighborhoods, but this additional thought of it being a school route could be helpful as well.
Thank you for that. And then finally, one of the buildings over there is county owned, I think, right? One of the properties. And I guess I would just suggest that if we see, and if there's a rationale for having some sort of civic use over there that helps pull the neighborhood together, and I'm not suggesting it should be a library, but I think the Easton Library is a real resource for that neighborhood and makes it feel kind of special. If there's a civic purpose that would help knit this community together, that might be a place to go try to work on it. But then if that's what we want to do, we should get on our horses and start riding and start talking to the county. So that's more by way of an opportunity. And thank you very much. Thank you for the work. And thanks to the subcommittee for all of their work on this so far. Thank you.
Councilmember Beach.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Great comments, Councilmember Brownrigg. Also do appreciate Mayor O'Brien and Councilmember Colson's work on the subcommittee. It's very exciting. It looks terrific. My question is more of a process question that occurred to me in seeing some of even just the road designs. How are we engaging it's great we have a CAC, but how are we engaging our commissions or our BPAC? Those were the ones that jumped out at me as I was looking through as far as the roadway designs, but there's also great input. I'm sure that our Beautification and Parks Commission, et cetera, planning, has input on this. Is there a part of the process where they will have an opportunity to learn more about this?
Kevin, I see you're taking a breath. Okay, go.
Yeah, sure. So I'll say we've between the Community Advisory Committee does have some folks on it that are very much advocates for bike and ped and transportation. Our Technical Advisory Committee has representatives from Public Works and Engineering who are articulating some of those positions. We have not formally built into the process the meetings with either the Transportation and Parking Commission or the BPAC. Should that be something the council's interested in, we can look at that. We've reviewed with the Planning Commission and with the CAC as being the sort of community side. But should there be a desire, we can expand our outreach as well.
Thanks, Mr. Gardner. I think it's great to engage in. All our commissions are highly engaged. Maybe there's a way to do it in a joint way, but I'd be excited if that could be something we could at least look into personally. Thanks.
Sure. And one thing I did want to add also, we do have the chairs. Originally, it was the chairs of each commission were in the CAC. Since then, some of the chairs have moved around, and we've generally kept the same members, even if they're no longer chair. So we did have the chair of Teaspoon, as well as Park and Rec. And I don't believe we had Beautification, but Park and Rec was there.
Thanks.
Thank you, Director Gardner. Actually, I was going to mention that, but you beat me to it. Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. Yes, and they were very engaged, and they were engaged at every meeting. And then we also had the opportunity to have a lot of local business people and folks who do have international, to Councilman Brownrigg's point about an international and sort of more global perspective. And then these are people who work in, China and Europe and all over the US. So it was exciting to have those kind of committee members. It wasn't what I would call the usual grouping of committee members, the people that always just raise their hand. We did go out very proactively and seek a more diverse committee for advisory. And we were very fortunate that literally everyone we contacted said yes and engaged. I also just have a couple quick questions. One is, so as we develop the road, I hadn't really thought about this, but as we develop the portion that's in this North Rollins Road area, will there be, there's a little tiny piece that will go all the way to Millbrae Avenue and then all the way to Broadway. And I think it's really important this isn't just an island. So how can we make sure that this neighborhood connects all the way through to the Broadway and then connects all the way to downtown? Because I think it's just as important to invite people into the neighborhood as to invite people out of the neighborhood. So that's first question. And then I have one more.
I know that we've been having some meetings with the city of Millbrae to make sure we have that connection to them, and having the TAC members of the public works involved, sort of that we're making that connection. And Mike, if you want to elaborate on that, because we have to make those connections to work.
Yeah, I mean, from an infrastructure, thank you for your question, Councilman Colson. From an infrastructure roadway standpoint, we have had coordination with Millbrae on how we would connect to the north. Going to the south, we actually see the preferred plan, as we showed, transitioning at the intersection of David into the portion of Rollins that would then connect down to Broadway. That is part of the city's bike plan also, but would be bike lanes on each side. So could be developed or implemented at the same time, but would have a slightly different look and feel, just as it right now that the study looks at North Rollins and has the bike facility on the one side, but that would be our planned transition zone to connect further south.
Great, thank you. And then just a quick note, and then one more question with regard to, again, Councilman Brownrigg, you had some questions about, making sure that it's not a food desert. And I mean, there are 3 or 4 wonderful markets on Broadway that I hope they can access, as well as the plaza. But also, I think what we're starting to see in some of the multifamily residential is retail built in, small retail, and then which I'm hoping, would include food, restaurant, all the kinds of important things that make a city vibrant after 6 p.m. at night. And then also, we've set that road up in a way that it's large enough and big enough with some of the side streets and these little parks that we could have a second farmers market, maybe on a different day or also on Sunday, that would, provide great opportunity. We talked a lot about that, wanting to have a farmers market along with entertainment facilities and destination music, destination, farmers market music, a lot of different things that would attract people from the city. So we were thinking very much about that in a dynamic way. My second question, though, is really regarding the transmission lines and this sort of, park underneath the transmission lines. Can you remind me, Kevin? I believe that's private property with an easement. Is that correct? So there's nothing that can really be built under there. So really what we're going to be doing is going to the landowners at some point and trying to figure out how to fund some type of green infrastructure that I'm guessing either the private property owners around there would help us pay for, or we'd have to figure out some funding mechanism. But the long-term plan would be to work with those property owners to put something there, because I know right now there's some parking lots and a few other things under there. So it's not like tomorrow it's going to happen. It's just a long-term vision. Is that right?
That's correct. And yeah, there's really only 2 things you can put under the power lines, either open space or parking. And right now it's mostly parking. We are seeing the first piece of open space in the 1 Adrian Court project. So that's a precedent for when a property turns over, then that's a great opportunity to add another piece of open space. But otherwise, yes, there needs to be, if it's an existing parking use, or there needs to be a compelling reason to change that use, or when the property is redeveloped, then that can be the opportunity as well.
Great. Well, I'm very excited about this project. This has been so fun to work with the consultants and the community to develop a great vision that is helping us meet our RENA numbers. It's building a lot of housing. It's really opening up our community and welcoming people who are hopefully working here, but not only working here, but want to just live here because it's just a wonderful town and with great schools and great amenities. So thank you guys. I can't thank the consultants enough. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Councilmember Colson. I would actually like to echo some of her comments since I've had the opportunity to sit on the subcommittee. It has been a pleasure working with Linda and John and Mike. And the community has just been really excited about this whole process and a lot of great feedback and just a lot of engagement. And so it's really been nice to see how this has evolved, over the last, year and a half. I do want to, I understand some Councilmember Brownrigg's remarks in regards to, what's going to be offered within the neighborhood itself. And that has been discussed, but I also don't want us to forget that we want them also to visit the rest of Burlingame and not be isolated in their own neighborhood. Because I do think, Broadway can really benefit from developing this neighborhood over there. And so it will also, help their businesses. So we really want to encourage both, amenities within the community, but then also encourage amenities for them to go to outside that community. But this is kind of another kind of once in a lifetime, opportunity to develop a new neighborhood and integrate it into our community. So it's been a really exciting process, and I look forward to moving forward. Anyone else before we continue onward? Councilmember Colson.
I'm just going to make one comment here, which is I hope that when people look at the city council in Burlingame, the city doesn't get cast as a not in my backyard city, because this to me is a YIMBY situation and a YIMBY project. This is a yes in my backyard. And I just want to really thank our colleagues for having the vision to change the general plan zoning and be as welcoming. And I also want to thank many, many, many of the people that I see here on the phone call today who live in our community and who are receptive and open-minded to creating a neighborhood that will bring in probably 6,000 new people into our city. And it's really important, and it's really hard work. And we owe a debt of gratitude to our residents for having open hearts and open minds to doing this and not battling us the whole way.
Councilmember Brownrigg.
I just want to add an amen to Councilman Colson's comments. I'm pretty sure that if every city created a general plan that imagined growing its population by 20% in 10 years, we'd solve the housing crisis. So I do give ourselves a collective pat on the back, and to our residents for leaning in as well. So I completely agree.
Mayor O'Brien, we do have some comments from the public as well on this item.
Okay. I will. Are these emails that you've received?
One email and one hand is up.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the email, and then we'll go to the public.
We received an email from Manito. He says, "Good evening. Thank you very much for a thorough presentation. Couple of questions about the slide showing the preferred alternative for Rollins Road. One was the Traffic Safety Parking Commission asked to review this proposal, specifically the two-way bikeway on one side of Rollins. Secondly, the concept presented is inconsistent and is actually in conflict with the preferred design identified in the bike ped plan. Further, it's also in conflict with Millbrae's soon-to-be adopted active transportation plan. Third, Was city engineering staff in the TAC or otherwise given a chance to participate in the selection of this as the preferred alternative? Perhaps this would not have been selected. A two-way bikeway like that looks good as 2D cross-section. Unfortunately, in reality, such a design will be problematic because of the frequent driveways. This is why this was not chosen by the bike ped plan consultant. This is a bad setup where drivers are not expecting bicycle riders to be in a counter flow position. Think about it. If you're turning right out of one of the Rollins driveways, you look left for a gap and go, not expecting a bicycle rider coming in the opposite direction. The same if you're turning left into one of those driveways. In general, the Rollins plan is a step in the right direction, just concerned that certain elements aren't consistent with other plans the city has developed and or is developing. Would you like me to call on the member of the public?
I will open the public. I have one hand raised by KLB. You want to unmute yourself?
I have nothing to say.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else from the public? All right, if not, then I'll close public comments. And then Councilmember Brownrigg, you had your hand up? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Just quickly, could somebody address Mr. Velasco's question about whether Teaspoon was consulted and whether our professional staff was consulted? I don't need to go back and forth on the substance of the concerns, but just whether procedurally this plan has had input from those parties. Thank you.
Yeah, so as mentioned, the chair of Teaspoon is on the Community Advisory Committee, and while he doesn't speak for the entire commission, that was representation, and then Public Works and Engineering staff are on the Technical Advisory Committee. So this has been vetted through both of those committees. In terms of Millbrae, I will just say we've coordinated very specifically with their staff on the exact bike route to the Millbrae BART station. I can't speak for the rest of the Millbrae planning, but in looking at the particulars of how Adrian works and how it kind of meanders through and over to the BART station, this all aligns pretty well with that.
Great, thank you, Director Gardner. Okay, again, thank you very much to our presenters and some very good questions and comments this evening. So we look forward to moving forward with this process. All right, we will move to public comments. This is a time when the members of the public may speak about any item that is not on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to suggest an item for a future council agenda may do so during the public comment period. The Ralph M. Brown Act prohibits the city council from acting on any matter that is not currently on the agenda. So I am going to open up the public comments. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Please raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to close the public comment. Megan, are there any emails?
No, they're not.
Okay, very good. All right, then on that note, we will move to the approval of the consent calendars. Anyone, any of my colleagues want to pull a consent calendar item off? All right, any emails to our city clerk?
No, we didn't receive any.
All right, and then I'm going to open to public comment. Is there anyone from the public that would like to pull something off the consent calendar? Please raise your hand. Okay, I will close the public comments. So can I entertain a motion from someone?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move to approve items 8A through 8F.
Do we have a second?
I'll make a second.
Okay, very good. Motion made by Vice Mayor Ortiz, seconded by Councilmember Coulson. Megan, can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Beach,
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Ortiz,
Yes.
Mayor O'Brien.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. All right, we will move forward to our public hearings. We have a couple this evening. So we're going to start with item 9A, and this is a public hearing and adoption of a resolution approving and levying the 2022 San Mateo County Tourism Business Improvement District assessments on hotel businesses within the district. So can we have the staff report, please?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council Member. Before you tonight is public hearing item for San Mateo County Tourism Business Improvement District, is also called TBID assessment for 2022. The TBID provide marketing and a promotional effort for the hotel through San Mateo County, Silicon Valley Convention, and the Visitor Bureau. As you recall, at the November 1st meeting, the City Council approved the district annual report along with the resolution to declare the intention to hold tonight public hearing and levy the annual assessment for 2022. After last meeting, the staff made a couple minor corrections to the exhibit of the resolution. The first one is the header for the exhibit C should be read as draft January 1st, 2022 instead of draft January 1st, 2021. Also, at the end of October, the Pullman San Francisco Bay Hotel in Red Oak City also changed its name to Grand Bay San Francisco, which is reflected on the third page of Exhibit C. So the resolution in the tonight meeting package, and also the notice staff sent out, all have the updated information for these two areas. Tonight, the council is asked to conduct a public hearing and determine whether a majority protest had been made. The city clerk can report on any protest received. Megan, do we have any protest?
No, we haven't received any.
Okay. Since we did not receive any protest, staff recommend adopting the resolution and approve the assessment. This will conclude my staff report. Tonight, we also have our Bureau President, John Hutar, in the audience tonight. John and I are here to answer any question you may have. Back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much for the presentation. To my colleagues, do you have any questions before I open it up to public comment? Okay, if not, I will open it up to public comment. And if John Hutar is on, if you'd like to say words, please feel free to do so. Okay, I did see your hand go up and then it disappeared. John, did you want to say a few words?
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go. Yes.
Good evening, Mayor O'Brien and members of council. It's a privilege to come back to you again in an improved state of tourism this year compared to last year. Though we're not where we need to be or want to be, we have been on a steady path of recovery since July. In aggregate, hotels in San Mateo County have been running an occupancy between 58 and 60%, with some modest improvements in average daily rate, which is far better than where we were 12 months ago. So that is a very good thing. We are optimistic about recovery. I describe it as having the car ready for a trip. It's been serviced, it's filled with fuel, it's loaded with luggage. We're on the on-ramp, and the on-ramp just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. But that part is out of our hands. We've spent a lot of energy reworking our marketing materials, engaging in different programs, trying to think out of the box, which we feel worked. We were very concerned when Delta variant came that was really going to cause occupancy to decrease, and we feel it's a big win just maintaining that steady growth, as I mentioned. So as we now face Omicron, we have different kinds of news coming our way. Positive news with recent leases secured by Facebook Meta in Burlingame specifically, some terrific leases, lease activity development happening throughout the county. And then corporate campuses still not announcing openings. So there's good news and news that we would like to go a different way, but suffice it to say that we are on a trajectory of improvement. The international market is gaining momentum. We had a very positive international trade show in late October. Last week at SFO, we held a reception which hadn't been done in years, announcing a direct international flight from SFO to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, an event that you would, in a normal pre-COVID year, you would have 2 or 3 of these new direct routes announced. We finally had one in the COVID era, so we are filled with optimism. We appreciate everyone's support in the industry, whether they're a luxury hotel, a limited service hotel, a restaurant, or an attraction in the county. And we're hopeful that a year from now, it'll be even a more significant improvement than we saw over the last 12 months. And if you have any questions, I'll gladly do my best to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hutar. Any questions from my colleagues for him? Okay, well, thank you very much again. It's nice to hear the update. I know you probably wish it was much better, but at least it's good to see there's some positive progress.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public? Okay. Back to my colleagues. Any comments?
Make a motion to approve, Madam Mayor, if you're willing.
That's fine with me. Anyone who would like to second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Councilmember Brownrigg and a second by Ricardo Ortiz to approve the levy assessments for the San Mateo County Tourism Business Improvement District. Can we have roll call, Megan?
Councilmember Beach,
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ortiz,
Yes.
Mayor O'Brien.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Next on our agenda is item 9B, which is a public hearing. It's the 4th public hearing for the transition from at-large elections to by-district elections for city council seats. And our city clerk will be going over the staff report on this.
Yes, I'll turn it over to redistricting partners, Paul Mitchell, in a second. And before that, I just wanted to go through my staff report. So Mayor and council members, tonight is our 4th hearing on the transition to district elections. And staff is hoping tonight that council will select one of the 4 draft maps that redistricting partners has drawn so that we can bring back an ordinance formally adopting the map. At previous hearings and when we met on this subject, I've spent a lot of time thoroughly outlining the outreach efforts that my office has conducted, not only to educate the public on this transition, but also to obtain public input. In this meeting, I thought I'd do it a little differently and instead focus on some of the feedback and questions that arose from the last meeting so that I could provide some clarity. So one of the first things we heard at the last meeting was, how are we utilizing these community of interest forms that the public filled out? And what did we do with these drawn maps from the public? So while other jurisdictions like the county utilized commissions to undertake their districting process, we felt that the best way to serve the public was to allow all members of the public to partake in the process. Therefore, we conducted 8 months of outreach, giving people a plethora of opportunities to share their input on what the map should look like. redistricting partners was not tasked with selecting from the maps that were drawn by the public which one to bring to the council to consider. Instead, redistricting partners used the information we gathered from the public and looked at the trend lines. How are people defining their neighborhoods? Are people putting areas together? Are people, considering the same communities of interest or issues in showing how they think the district line should be? So redistricting partners took that information plus the 2020 census data in order to draw the maps that they did. When we talk about districting, there's kind of 5 principles that Paul has kind of drilled into my head, where all the districts have to be of equal population size, they have to be compact, they have to be contiguous, they have to follow city and county lines, and government lines, and they also have to take into consideration communities of interest. And what came up at the last meeting was we talked about census blocks, and a lot of the public at the November 1st hearing discussed how some of the lines seemed a little odd to them on the districts, or specifically on draft map D, they asked about a kind of a little notch that was taken out around Adeline Drive and what that meant. Other members of the public asked if we could keep all of El Camino Real, just the multifamily dwelling units on both sides of the road together in their own district. And so I wanted to share with you what our census block map looked like so you could get a better idea of why this wasn't possible. So this was the census block map for 2020. Let me just zoom in here for a second. It's not letting me drag it, of course. So that's what I wanted. Okay, so when we talk about census blocks, each of the districts have to be of equal population count. So where does that information come from? That comes from the 2020 census. So when the census is being done, they draw it into kind of 2 units. It's either census tracts, which are these larger portions of the county, following county lines, and those will have approximately 4,000 people, or the smaller unit is census blocks. And so when districting partners is drawing the maps, they're utilizing the census blocks in order to make sense of the equal population counts. So if we look on this one, we can see that El Camino Real right here acts as kind of a border on all these census blocks. Once, if Paul was to split these census blocks in order to keep all the multifamily units together, we would have no understanding of the kind of counts in that split. So you wouldn't know how each half fell. So it's more than just keeping any units together. We would end up having to bring in more of these neighborhoods in order to make that kind of El Camino Real census area work. And as our former mayor, Kathy Baylock, said last time, it's all a jigsaw puzzle. So once Paul starts moving some of the census blocks around, the count can go off. And so he's constantly kind of having to retool these counts in order to make them work. Another thing that we heard at the meeting, and I'm going to pull up another map, is okay, you guys can see the general map in front of me? Yes? Okay, good. Okay, so this is the Burlingame general plan map. This is our residential neighborhoods, or kind of our historical neighborhoods. So another thing we heard at the last meeting, and that I've heard in a lot of emails, is from the residents of the Burlingame Hills district, or Burlingame's Hills, excuse me, and about their disappointment in that the 4 maps, Burlingame Hills is never kept all together into one district. And there are 2 major issues for why this wasn't possible. One, when we look at Burlingame Hills, it's located here and over here, but it's also located in this kind of grayish area. But what that is unincorporated San Mateo County. So in unincorporated San Mateo County, while you may put Burlingame on your mailing address, you don't vote in city elections and you don't vote on city measures. So when Mr. Mitchell goes about districting for us, he can't take that unincorporated area into consideration. And when he doesn't take that unincorporated area into consideration, the problem is that there's nothing, it doesn't flow through. So that brings up the second issue. In order to keep the hills together, we would end up having to follow some of the census blocks through Mills Estate, Ray Park, and Easton Addition in order to keep Burlingame Hills together. And so one of our goals in this project is always to keep neighborhoods as together as possible, but it's inevitable that some neighborhoods will have to be split up in order to keep districts compact, contiguous, and of equal population. So you'll even see on the maps as we go through, or Mr. Mitchell goes through, that Burlingame Parks is another one that had to be divided because, you know, it's not together. This is Hillsborough here in the middle. Okay. So I then lastly wanted to talk about, I keep losing you guys. I wanted to talk about communities of interest in Burlingame. So the public and the council spent a lot of time discussing what is a community of interest at the November 1st public hearing. So if we look at it at the broadest spectrum, the California Constitution defines it as a contiguous population which shares common social and economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. What I thought Redistricting Partners did really good is they narrowed down that definition for us last week, or at the last hearing, when they stated that there's kind of three prongs to defining these communities of interest. What is the community of interest? So you define it. What is the footprint of that community of interest? And what is the relationship to city governance? So one kind of, general one I was thinking of today was if there was a neighborhood where there was a lot of car break-ins, they would have a clear community of interest in trying to provide safety to their neighborhood. So that's their community of interest. Maybe they want more streetlights so that it will prevent car break-ins. Their footprint is that neighborhood, and their relationship to city governance is direct because it's the city that can provide them with either the streetlights, or maybe we send the police out to patrol more to prevent these break-ins. So an important facet of districting is really keeping communities of interest together. And the goal of districting is to give communities of interest a voice in governance. So we're giving them a platform. So another thing that came up at the November 1st hearing as it relates to communities of interest was, what if instead we did kind of east-west bands, where we pulled all the way from the west side into the east side and created 5 equal districts that way. And when it was discussed, the public and others voiced that this would create diversity and socioeconomic status throughout each of the districts and different zoning in each of the districts. But that's really, as I've been telling the city manager, that wasn't our assignment. Our assignment was to put like with like. So when we're creating districting, what we're trying to do is put the same community of interest, keep them together. So we're always trying to put like with like. These east-west bands would not accomplish that goal. Instead, they would reflect Burlingame as a whole, when what we're trying to do is raise up the platforms of different communities of interest for them to speak at the government level. So I wanted to talk about some of the communities of interest that I've seen during this 8 months and that I've heard from the public on. So one of them, as you all will relate to, is the Peninsula Interchange. The individuals that live over here in Lion Hogue and in Burlingame Gables feel very concerned about what happens when the Peninsula Interchange in San Mateo starts going underway, and how this will affect their traffic. How many cars, how many extra individuals would be going through there? What are we going to do slow streets? Things that we've already started working on. Another community of interest that we've talked about at the council, but also I heard from the community, is sea level rise. How does this more greatly impact these neighborhoods that, properties are right there on the bayfront. What will be their experience? How do we provide them protection against sea level rise? Another one I heard from is that 52% of our community are renters. This is a community of interest, but how do we serve them? How do they get affordable housing? Where do we put in more housing so that it takes care of the need? You know, we've already talked about that tonight with the North Rollins Road District. So we see a lot of renters here in the downtown Burlingame area, of course, along El Camino Real, on Carolyn Avenue, around Broadway. And then we're going to see it over here with the Mills Peninsula, how they've talked about creating 800 units of housing near them and up along Truesdale. So renters are more spread out in our city, but we can see compact communities of interest of renters or in multifamily unit individuals, I should say too, because we have condos, all that down here in the downtown Burlingame area. Another one that I heard of is kind of our single family homeowners that want to ensure that our neighborhoods are, you know, family oriented neighborhoods are protected, and concerns about SB 9 or neighborhood aesthetics and design. Another one is bike routes. I heard a lot from the individuals that live in between El Camino Real and California Drive about how do we create bike routes for them to get to Caltrain or to BART or, you know, across town easily. This area also was very vocal about Broadway grade separation and how it affects them getting onto the highway and cars diverting through their neighborhoods. Another one I heard about is people in the Ray Park Mills Estate area concerned about Mills Peninsula Hospital and noise from the hospital, and if these 800 units do come online and how it affects their parking. And then lastly, I heard a lot about wildfire concerns, especially now that we're in a drought year, and how it affects these areas of the city. So this is all to say that these are all communities of interest that are within our city, and there's a ton more, and we could all talk about all these different ones. And so I kind of think of it as a Venn diagram. How do you keep like communities of interest together? And sometimes they have multiple interests, and how do we keep those together in order to give them a platform to speak on? And so that's kind of what you need to look at when we review these maps. Which one of these maps reflects these communities of interest and gives them a platform to speak on? So another, and all these issues kind of, you can see that three-prong approach that Paul Mitchell had talked about and how they directly relate to city governance. So another suggestion that happened at the meeting was, what about using elementary school attendance lines, excluding, you know, Hoover Elementary? So going back to when we had 5 schools. So one, of course, you know, this brings us back to the past before our population has gone up, because we're looking at when we only had 5 schools, but there's also other issues with this methodology. For one, while where your child goes to school is an individual's community of interest as it relates to school district governance, it doesn't have that direct correlation to city governance. Secondly, the school district attendance lines include unincorporated Burlingame, whereas when we do districting, we are not including the unincorporated portions of Burlingame. And then lastly, attendance lines can change, and we have no control in the city of how they change. That's all done by the school districts. So I'd ask that, you know, with Mr. Mitchell's presentation tonight, and we're here to answer any questions, you kind of think of all these communities of interest and how we keep them together to create equal, you know, playing field for all in the city. Thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Megan. I was just going to ask for questions. Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just want to say to our city clerk that I think you have done a fantastic job of managing a very complex project, of always keeping your cool, of being at the farmer's market and everywhere else, Megan, and really explaining all of this very clearly. You know, I'm not a fan of the process, but I think that you have made it as logical as possible. So I really want to thank you for that. Your clarity is a relief. The question I have, and it's maybe it doesn't have an answer, but I think when I listen to all of the communities of interest issues that you put on the table, all of which I agree with, they were almost all, if not all, kind of policy related. What should we do about C-Rise? What should we do about renters? What should we do? And that's great. But we were sued on racial grounds. And I thought missing from your analysis was whether one plan was better or not in terms of delivering on that particular lawsuit. Not that I believe it has merit, but because that was the grounds on which we were sued.
So I think that's also a community of interest, and it obviously is, under the Federal Voting Rights Act.
Right. I completely acknowledge it's a community of interest. I just want you to be able to speak to it with respect to these plans, so we're not just talking policy issues.
So I wanted to point out other communities of interest because we've gotten such a vocal community here about other things going on, but we obviously also have to think of those. And so there's certain areas of the city where you can see that there's a larger Asian population. And while we can't, under Supreme Court law or under the Supreme Court case Shaw, we can't just draw a district based solely on a person's color. We do have to take that into consideration with the other rules of districting. So you can see that there's in most of the maps that the district encompassing Mills Estate and Ray Park, we're getting a larger swath of Asian population in that area. And if there's no other
Any other questions? Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just along those lines, and I appreciate Councilmember Brownrigg's question. Is the Latinx population in our community really scattered throughout? At least that's kind of what I'm gathering, but I'd like to understand whether any of these maps sort of leans in and with the existing community of interest also benefits that community as well.
I think Mr. Mitchell can probably talk about that more, but what I will say is when I look at his data and on the maps, you can really see that it's pretty evenly spread out. Whereas while we have that Asian higher numbers in Mills Estate and Ray Park, the Latinx kind of stayed at the 10 to 15% in all of his districts that he created.
Thanks.
Great. If there are no other questions for.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, through the mayor, one more follow-up question. Were we able to do, we discussed last time an overlay as far as the rental community, because that is such an important stakeholder, large portion of our population, and how does that play out in the current maps?
I didn't get to that, but I will say, I spent a lot of time talking to Housing for All Burlingame and some of our other community organizations. And we looked at, as Councilmember Colson had pointed out in one of our previous meetings, at the zoning maps to kind of look at where we've zoned for housing. And as I tried to point out when I looked at that residential neighborhood map, we're seeing a large swath of it in the downtown Burlingame area where you have it all around City Hall, on El Camino Real, on the other side of Burlingame Ave. But the trickier part about it is that we have moved our rental units close to, for good reason, close to public transportation. So you're going to get that large portion of it along Carolyn Avenue, but also now in the Rollins district. And then it's over there by the hospital and up Truesdale and Burlingame or Broadway. So there's portions of it in different areas, but the largest concentration of it right now would be in that downtown area.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we can move forward to Paul Mitchell in his presentation.
Thank you very much. That was an awesome presentation. I really enjoyed hearing Megan talk about it with such great experience, like hands-on knowledge, and also like having control over the technical aspects of what we're doing in the redistricting process is really great. And I also applaud the work the city's done. You've had a great staff. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. and go through these plans. And of course, every time we do a redistricting meeting, we like to start just by talking about, what is the Fair Maps Act criteria? What is the process a little bit? And then we'll go into the map revisions. And Megan covered this, but I do always talk about these primary functions in redistricting, that districts need to be rebalanced to be equal size. The idea is that every resident in the city should have equal access to their council member. If one council district was twice as large as another, the residents would essentially have half the representative power. And they also should be equal size based on one person, one vote. We used to, even in California, have legislative districts where you'd have huge Los Angeles County gets 2 legislators and Inyo County gets 1. And, the idea of having districts be equal size has been something that we've instituted in California based on Supreme Court cases. Districts need to be contiguous, meaning they need to be whole parts. And Megan did a great job of identifying one of the areas where in your city, there might be some desire to draw districts in a different way. If we could, maybe split census blocks or make non-connected pieces of the city into the same district. But since they can't be in the same district if they're not contiguous, we're restricted in that way. Maintaining communities of interest. The idea of keeping, as Megan put it, like with like, but also ensuring that as we're drawing districts, we're taking, as what's in the state law, identified communities of interest and placing them into a single district in a way to maximize their voting and representative power. Preserving neighborhoods, other governmental boundaries, like school district lines was the example she used. And then keeping districts compact, which is not to mean big or small, but the shape. And the state law has instituted a new definition for compactness. It's kind of new nationally. And it's the idea that districts are compact if they don't bypass nearby populations to go out and get some faraway population. As we conducted this process, we went from the community up, as opposed to kind of to put it lightly, the desires of the elected officials or political parties or others down. So the idea of building from the community up meant going out to the public and having multiple ways for them to engage in the process, either using community of interest forms, drawing maps, calling in, writing, emailing, having access to the process and ensuring it's community driven. When we get this community input, we then have to try to square that with the rules of redistricting. So Megan's example was great about El Camino and saying, well, there's definitely a valid maybe community input in this regard, but can we square that with the requirements of the redistricting law? And then as we developed maps, working with you and community members and publicly drawn maps, then went out to the public again with, here's some maps, with those maps available on the website and going out into the community and trying to engage them for feedback. This process has helped us develop 3 plans and now 4 with Plan D that I'll go over with the overview pages, the data tables, and then I have access to a little zoom in of any of the individual districts. To start, the city as a whole, we start with a population of 31,000 residents. And some questions were brought up about as an example, how we deal with the ethnic populations. And definitely the city is in this process because of a claim from an ethnic community. However, when we conduct the redistricting, we have to conduct we have to conduct it in the way that's consistent with all the other state law. And we can definitely see that there are some Latino and Asian populations that, depending on how they were spread around the city, could be a sufficient factor in how you draw lines. The Latino population is 11% of the citizen voting age population down here. In all of our plans, the Latino population doesn't get above 17, close to 18%. We looked at that, and the Latino population isn't, locked into one portion of the city to where you could draw a district where you could conceivably create, say, a Latino influence district or a Latino majority minority district. Same is true with the Asian population. We have the ability to create districts that are more heavily Asian and can be more of an influence from the Asian community, but no majority minority Asian district. As we go into these plans, we have individual maps, and you should have access to those. And we also have web-based maps that you should be able to have access to zoom in, and we could, if we needed to, show those tonight as well if we needed to look closely at anything. So these plans you've seen for a while, and I'll go through these quickly, and then Plan D is one that might be a little newer. So Plan A follows railroads, highways, and other main streets. It keeps the downtown Burlingame and Burlingame Park whole. The neighborhoods of Shorefront, Burlingame Gardens, that area is kept whole. It has a majority of Burlingame Hills, and as you'll see, it keeps the Burlingame Village and Burlingame Grove together. We can see the shapes of these districts here. And a lot of this, Megan actually went over really well, some of the concerns about how these districts are drawn and some of the communities that are being kept together. When we look at the total population, the total deviation of this plan is 6.8, meaning the largest and smallest districts are that far apart, a positive 3.6 and a negative 3.2. The total deviation of the plan is 6.8. The total allowable deviation is 10%. And so you're well within that. And there's not like extra points in redistricting for getting that deviation really small. There is extra points in redistricting for keeping more neighborhoods whole, for keeping communities of interest together, for responding to community feedback and dealing with those kind of things that will serve the community as these lines are going forward for the next decade. But the deviation just needs to be within that 10%. Draft Plan B. This summarizes the neighborhoods that are kept together, but I think just seeing the lines will be a little more informative. You can see how now, instead of this D and C being evenly split here, we have this portion of B coming down, and then A and E. You'll see in all the plans, A is somewhat similarly situated, but you see different relationships between, in this, the B and the E districts. The total deviation here is 4.5. Draft C follows these neighborhood boundaries again, but it tries to address a different way of following these roads and natural boundaries as well to keep these neighborhoods together. Draft Plan C. And then the deviation is 4.6. And we'll go ahead and go into Draft Plan D, and I'll spend a little bit more time on Draft Plan D. So this starts with the elements from A, B, and C. And so it takes that relationship going into the Burlingame Hills from C and D, those two districts. It draws those from the earlier plans A and C. It keeps the Mills Estate, Burlingame Plaza, and Ray Park together, and the western portion of Burlingame Hills together. It has a District A similar to plans A and B, keeping the downtown Burlingame and Burlingame Park Terrace together. And then Lion Hogue in District B with Burlingame Gables and Burlingame Gardens together. So you can see the relationship between how this waterfront side is essentially evenly split. We have the Lion Hogue community whole here. We have this going into the Burlingame Hills with the same split as A and C. This version of the plan, there was a lot of work to just try to get the balancing of the districts right, which is always a challenge in redistricting process, to try to meet all these different goals of keeping these neighborhoods together, creating clean lines, and also maintaining that population equivalency. When we were done, our total deviation was 5.1, and that created the fourth plan. So we have here I can just slide through these and it kind of moves in motion. Draft plan A, B, C, and D. So you can see that some of the similarities between all those plans and what are the kind of trade-offs between each of those as you're looking at those. So from here, the what's next is that you are going to hopefully be selecting a plan or modifying one of these plans to be agendized for your next meeting so that it can be adopted. This, as we said, I think from one of our very first hearings, as we went through the time frame, that this fourth hearing on the second chance to see these maps, this is really the most important hearing for kind of executing the redistricting itself, or the districting process. So going from here to the next hearing, you'll have one map that is available for you to vote on, and that will be the map that has been public for 7 days and posted as your final plan. So today is really the day where you'll be making that most important decision about the lines for the next 10 years. And this is where we're at. Our fourth public hearing, December 6th. And at this point, after the second hearing on draft plans, we really are at a place for you to have a discussion to select one plan to go forward. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop my sharing. But I can bring up anything, including Maptitude or Web Map, if there's any questions or things we want to address.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I see our city manager has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mayor O'Brien, and thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for that presentation. And Megan, of course, did such a great job in laying everything out. I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that the reason we're doing this is that a lawyer down in Southern California chose to send us a letter saying that we needed to move to district elections. It was not actually any group of people who decided to go after the city. And so I didn't want anybody to have a mistaken impression that that we had received complaints from one ethnic group or another. It was a lawyer who has a cottage industry of approaching cities in this way. And so that being said, we are working hard to make sure that we do things the right way. And that's why we've done, Megan and her team have done such an amazing job of all the outreach. And so I think we have some good information here, and hopefully council will be able to make a decision tonight so that we can move forward. Our goal is to get everything in place as soon as possible so that anybody who does want to run for one of these new districts in 2022 has plenty of time to figure out if they're in a district, how they might go about running, start, putting their campaign together and whatnot. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification, City Manager Goldman. Appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Mitchell with his presentation? Okay, if not, I am going to open it up to public hearing. I will say that thank you very much to our city clerk, who I think did a phenomenal job explaining a very difficult issue in terms, I think, that we all can understand. And I think you did a very good job too, really listening to what the community had to say at our last meeting and kind of incorporating that. And this goes for Mr. Mitchell too, incorporating many of those concerns this evening and explaining all the different maps. And so hopefully our constituents can see some of the changes that were made. So on that note, I'm going to open it up to public hearing, and let's start with Sandra Lang.
Thank you, Mayor Kagren. And also, I really share your thoughts about complete this to our city clerk. This is obviously, we all know, believe me, this got beyond me a little bit. And also to Mr. Mitchell, I have one, I guess, a final question. I looked it over today, and the thing about the deviation, is that an internal measurement within each map? Is it mean how the deviation is measured between the different districts within a map, or is that a measurement of how that map against all the other maps that you put out. So, for example, I noticed on Plan A, I think you said it has 6.8. What would that indicate?
Happy to answer that if you'd like for me to.
Yes, please. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself.
Sure. So in redistricting, we have, there are two different things that we call deviation. First off is the deviation of any district is its difference from the ideal district size. If you had 5 districts and 100 people, each district would be 20 people. And if a district was 21 people would be the deviation from the exact size, and that percentage, 5%, would be its total deviation. It's deviation for that one district. The plan deviation, so unfortunately we use the same word for both things. The plan deviation is the largest district and the smallest district, and the difference in their deviation. So if the largest district is 3.2 over, and the smallest district is 2% under, then the plan deviation would be 5.2%. So the difference between the highest and the lowest percentages. It doesn't relate from plan to plan to plan. It's simply looking at within that plan, those 5 districts, what's the difference between the highest and the lowest population deviation.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Mitchell. And then we want to try to keep it under the 10%, correct?
Yeah, 10% is the requirement to stay under that marker.
Great, thank you. Next, I have IACFS. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me? Actually,
Yes.
that's my that's one of my nonprofits. My name is Lily Chu, and I live in Burlingame. So I don't necessarily agree with the way this lawsuit was brought about, nor do I think necessarily that someone of one ethnicity or another necessarily represents people in the district with one ethnicity or other's views. But it does bring up a good point, given the city and the demographics. Has there ever been an Asian American council member? And also, now that this process is changing with the redistricting, whatever it comes out of it, is there going to be any effort to inform the public and people who are from these minority member areas, groups, how they should run for city council or what the duties of city council members are? I bring this up also because with the nonprofits I've been connected with, there's been a drive within our own nonprofits to try to recruit more diverse people from different groups. That's my questions.
Thank you very much. This is to the city manager. To my knowledge, I don't think there has been Asian council member.
I'm not aware of that. Your tenure in Burlingame is a lot longer than mine, but just looking, we have all the folks up on the wall at City Hall, and I have not seen any Asian American council member in those pictures.
Very good. And then in regard to, people running, we do, I think all of us, talk to many constituents and encourage people to run in the elections. And then also we, people who have served on our commissions, which are diverse. We also encourage them to run because they have gained, a knowledge base, over the years serving. And so we always encourage, our commissioners. And like I said, we do have a diverse group in most of our commissions. So I do hope, that, they think about running. And then, as I said, I think all of our colleagues have come across so many constituents, over the years and, mentioned the importance of getting involved in the community. And so that is definitely one way, that's one step in looking forward to running for an office, futuristically, is getting involved. Next we have, and I'm not sure who's going to be speaking, so Mark and Marilyn.
Hi, this is Mark Byerson. I think all of these plans are good faith efforts to district Burlingame. I have just one question though. It relates to what was brought up at the last meeting, and that's the Anson apartments that I believe, as I understand it, were not included in the census, but are now mostly rented out, and it will be, it's hundreds of units, so hundreds of people. It's perhaps will be 10% of the district. And in looking at the four plans, I believe only in Plan C is the district that contains the Anson apartments, smaller in population than average. So once I realize it can't be included in the actual plan since it wasn't in the census, but in reality, the size of that district is the only one that would be sort of closest to having a fair distribution. So I was wondering if anyone can comment on these Anson apartments.
Thank you. So either Paul or maybe our city clerk would like to address that question. You are right in regard to we can't include it if it wasn't in the census of 2020, but the next census, it will be included. And as many people know, there is going to be quite a bit of construction over the next 10 years. So, all that will accumulate over that time period and be included in the next census. But if Megan or Mr. Mitchell would like to add to that, please do so.
No, I think Mayor O'Brien, that's exactly correct. We can only use the census data. And as we saw even earlier tonight with the North Rollins specific plan, we're going to see a lot of growth in different areas. And if Mills Peninsula does build up those 800 units, that's another at least 800 people. And then you have, our affordable housing project that we're doing in the downtown area, which will add a lot of residents. We brought these kind of concerns to Paul at the beginning, and we talked about North Rollins Road and how do you, work with future growth. And he, at the time, and he can speak more on it, but he gave a lot of great examples of other cities he had worked with where they had predicted like these huge increases. I think it was Sacramento. They had predicted huge increases in growth. And when they really got down to it, those 10 years later, it still equated to pretty equal growth throughout the city. So where we expect it isn't necessarily where it's going to be. And that's why we have to stick with what the census numbers are in 2020.
Megan's exactly right. We've had a number of different redistrictings. I think the Sacramento example was Natomas, where in 2011, everybody was like, Natomas's population's changing, and they wanted to try to predict what was going to happen, and predictions didn't come true. Another one that was a good example was in Davis. They were putting up new housing in North Davis, and everybody said, look, there's new housing over there. Like, I can see it. And it, in the human eye, kind of deceives and says, well, there's all these new people there. But then what they were missing was that in South Davis, there were a lot of homes and apartments that were just getting more people in them. They weren't having new construction. They were just getting more people per household. And in fact, there was more population growth in South Davis that the council members never saw than in North Davis. So the only thing we can do to adjust for future population growth, if we were to kind of understand or know the future, would be to utilize that deviation. So you could underpopulate an area that you expected to grow in the future. But it is always, it's a 10-year period, and a lot can change in those 10 years.
Thank you. Next we have Laura. I'm not sure if it's Hines or Hins.
Thank you, Mayor O'Brien. It's Hines. Yes, I'd like to thank our city clerk, Megan Hassel-Scherer, for her great presentation and explanation and consideration of all of the comments at last meeting. And much thanks to Paul Mitchell for taking into consideration and coming up with, I think, even a stronger plan, which is Plan D. And also, I would like to say that I don't believe, I feel like many of the people commented on districts and racial diversity or lack of racial diversity on our city council, which Burlingame has had in previous decades. Pretty dire strategy when I was young of not being inclusive of other racial minorities. However, I think the districting is great because it's nice to have someone that lives in your more or less area representing you on the city council, even if you maybe didn't pick that person, still they do live near you. And I think this is a strong move for Burlingame. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jennifer Pfaff.
I want to thank Megan mainly because I really beat you up. And because I'm just not a fan of how this came about. But I want to thank you for really taking the time to explain it to me. And and also all the council's questions and such. But I think given the 4 maps, I think the last one that was done, D, is far and away the best one I've seen. And in particular for the district that I am in, or I would be in, it pulls our line up to California Drive rather than calling the tracks the other side. It includes businesses on the other side on the west side of the tracks that actually do affect us over here, have always affected us. And so I very much appreciate acknowledging that in this case. So I want to thank you and the consultant for the effort, really do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Steve Epstein.
Hello. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you all this evening. I spent hours using the online district mapping tool. I submitted a communities of interest plan to keep the upper elevations together. I think it was referred to as the hills area at the last meeting. And also I think north or upper areas. I also submitted a map proposal that kept Burlingame Hills together, intact, and even kept Burlingame Park together. It met requirements for population deviation, compactness, and contiguousness, and maintain communities of interest as best as possible. In addition, it had a district with an Asian population of 28%. It seemed like a great plan, but it seems to have been ignored. Most of the time I was using the mapping tool, I was frustrated because some of the census level population numbers didn't seem to be used in the calculations. Since I can't see the coding, I can't figure out the source of the problems. One manifestation of at least one of the problems is that the sum of the percent deviations from the average size district never equals 0, even though mathematically it must. For example, if 4 districts are over the district population average by 1% each, exactly 1% each, then the 5th district must be 4% under the district population average. However, no matter how I drew the boundaries, this was never the case, and I have no way to figure out why it was giving me that error. Again, I spent hours working with this tool that is supposed to be one of the primary ways that the public can participate in this process. So I have 3 questions for the consultant. Number 1, did you consider my communities of interest submission and my map proposal? If so, why was the map rejected? Especially considering I believe it met all of your requirements. Number 2, did you read and look into the concerns about the mapping tool that I wrote to the city clerk several weeks ago? If so, why were the problems not corrected? And number 3, if you confirm that the online mapping tool has an error in the coding, then what is the value of the maps that citizens spent their valuable time and effort producing? And how can a map be selected this evening considering this flaw?
So since the time is up, we need to let other people speak if they wish to do so. But before we do that, there were a few questions posed. So Mr. Mitchell, would you be able to answer those questions?
Well, I would have to talk with our staff to see which map he submitted and which public testimony he submitted to see how they were utilized as part of the map drawing process. I know that the way that our process works is to take down all of those maps from the districtor site and to make the same atlases out of them that you see, the same format that you see from, as we were going through each of the plans. I haven't seen an error from districtor that the balancing wasn't correct. I'm happy to look at his exact way of describing that error and see what I can identify. But I can tell you that when plans are drawn in the districtor tool and we download them and put them into the Maptitude, they come out with the right deviations. So there wasn't any kind of endemic problem that we could identify with that. But I'm happy to kind of run through a test of that. The plans that we took, our process is to take down these public submissions, take all the community of interest testimony, and utilize that in developing the draft plan. So we look for essentially patterns in the maps, things that are reflective of the goals in redistricting, as Megan talked about, the keeping like with like. So we look for plans that kind of meet those tests as we start to develop the draft maps for you. So sometimes plans can come in that are really creative, and for one reason or another, they seem to maybe not meet the compactness we're looking for, maybe not keep the neighborhoods together in the manner we're looking for, maybe not reflect the underlying ethnic communities or communities of interest in the way we're looking for. And so they essentially we don't find a situation where a member of the public says, aha, there's the map that I drafted. But I will tell you that this concern that's being expressed it actually makes me feel great, because the public now in redistricting expects that their plans are going to be considered when maps are being drawn. 10, 20 years ago, it was never the public feeling as though they had a role. The public never had tools to be involved. So the redistricting process has changed so much in the 20 years that I've been working in redistricting that we now have members of the public coming forward and really having this high expectation that the public engagement they have is going to result in a final plan. And I think that's great. I think for this plan that you're going to adopt today and move to the next hearing, we'll have the DNA of a lot of public submission, a lot of hard work, and a lot of community engagement in a way that never would have been around before. So sometimes when I hear concerns about this, I kind of turn that around and I see how much it means that we've changed the expectations in Burlingame and around the state in regards to how the public should be engaged in this process. So, and I'll look into the specific questions.
And Madam Mayor, I just add that, we got a lot of maps submitted to us by just drawing at the farmer's market and other things. And when individuals were drawing and they'd be like, oh, our population numbers or our counts aren't equaling up exactly how you want it. The goal for me was always draw what you think your neighborhood is. How would you define your community of interest and district? the exact numbers, it equaling out how you would want it to equal out, was not the end goal. The end goal was for Mr. Mitchell to kind of, or Paul, to see how people thought of their neighborhoods and their districts. So as long as when Mr. Epstein was drawing his map and other members were, that they were giving a good general outline of how they saw our city being utilized. That's the goal, so that then Paul has an understanding when he goes in and uses the census data that he's seeing those trend lines and how people are dividing up their neighborhoods.
Very good. Thank you very much, Megan. Are there any other people from the public that would like to speak on this topic before I close public comment? We have Todd Robinette.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I just want to urge you, as a resident of Burlingame, to adopt draft Plan B. In my opinion, our neighborhood, which is Lion Hogue and Burlingame, and we are the most impacted by the Peninsula Interchange project, by the development, office building and hotel development on the east side of Burlingame, by the electrification of Caltrain. We really need to have our area as a standalone voter block. And draft Plan B achieves that, in my opinion. It does create it. We are a community of interest. It would include the Anson. It does include the North Park Apartments. It would include the new apartment development that's going on just north of the Anson. It's our neighborhood that really needs to have a voice. Our interests aren't really aligned with the offshore investors that own the Oculus campus or Tishman Spire that has just leased the 2 office buildings on Airport Boulevard to Meta, or the REITs that own the hotels on the east side. We really don't have anything in common with them. And I personally don't want my vote blended in with theirs. And I don't think my neighbors do either. So I ask you to please continue to consider draft Plan B. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else? Okay.
We did get some emails as well.
Okay. I'll close then the public comment under attendees, and then I'll switch then to you, City Clerk, to go through the emails, please.
Okay. This first email comes from Tom Payne. He says, we respectfully request that the council direct its consultants to try again. All of the draft plans protect and preserve 3 affluent neighborhoods, proposed districts A, C, and D, insulating them from the greatest problems facing Burlingame: pressure to increase housing density, office and commercial development, and the effective east-west division of Burlingame by the combined impact of high-speed rail and intensified commuter rail service. The burdens and negative effects of these forces will be borne by the residents in proposed districts B and E, permanently represented by a minority on the council. The only equitable division of Burlingame giving all residents meaningful representation on the council is to create east-west districts running from the hillside neighborhoods west of El Camino to the edge of San Francisco Bay. Each district would then include affluent, moderate, and lower income neighborhoods, retail, commercial, and office interests. Each member of the council would represent and be concerned with the interests of all sectors of our town. Burlingame would be a community rather than a group of warring special interests. We believe that e pluribus unum is the greatest principle of the American experiment. We have spent the last century fighting segregation and the creation of ethnic, racial, or economic ghettos. The current proposed districts are in defiance of that goal. And then we got one other email from Jan Cook. She says, I'm submitting public comment on the redistricting agenda item. Please consider draft map Plan B for adoption. This option meets the goals and criteria and also provides for specific representation for District E on the map. This neighborhood continues to need representation given its proximity to Caltrain, major traffic areas, and the downtown business district. With all these constraints, coupled with the increased intensity for denser housing and a new large community center in the footprint, the neighborhood needs representation. And that is it.
Great, thank you, Megan. All right, back to my colleagues. Who would like to start? Because we do need to pick a map this evening. Councilmember Brownrigg, followed by Councilmember Coulson.
Well, I'll go first. Look, I just, first of all, I don't believe this process is great for Burlingame, and I've said so for a long time, and I think most of us have. But we got backed into a corner. I don't like the fact that, now we're going to have some one person who thinks they're speaking for a neighborhood. I'd rather have 5 people speaking for my neighborhood. I liked being able to vote on all 5 people. I like being asked my opinion every 2 years, not every 4 years. So, I'm not happy with this, but I'm trying to make the best of it. With that in mind, I think Plan D is the right plan for the time being. I obviously understand that we are going to grow in different parts of the city. That's going to have to be adapted the next time we go through this process. And I will finish with this. I don't believe, if I'm representing a district, that district is the only interest that I have in Burlingame. And I, for one, and I think all 5 people up here on this dais believe, no matter who elects us, we represent the city and what's best for the city. So I, for one, will not get pushed into neighborhood politics of what's best for my area versus your area. I think we have to keep legislating in the best interest of the entire city. And I think most of us or all of us will. So that's my feeling. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you, Councilman Brownrigg, for articulating, I think, the sentiments in general of the council and most of the population of Burlingame. That said, I think map D, I also am in agreement. I appreciate that the consultant went back and took into consideration and included the majority of comments into the new map D, which I believe has a very, in terms of the Lion Hogue area, has a very similar footprint as map B. So in terms of keeping those communities of interest together, I think that it works. But I think it also fixes the cutout in the Easton edition that seemed odd. So, and I think it addressed a lot of the Lion Hogue neighborhoods concerns. I'm sorry that we can't put the Hills district together, but the conversation around that and the logic around that is does meet the standards set in the Voters' Right Act. And so, as unfortunate as that is, my neighborhood, well, I shouldn't say that. Other neighborhoods are going to be split up a little bit too. So it's the way it goes. But if, again, as Councilman Brownrigg says, people are elected with a view toward the whole community and making sure that we're taking care of the whole community, then those small variances should be quelled over time and not matter. So I'll support map D.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I last time I had expressed my preference for map A. Map D is a small change from map A in an area that's not heavily populated. So in my mind, it doesn't make a huge difference as far as creating that district. So I would be happy to go along with my counterparts and support map D. And I think that addresses a lot of the concerns. But just to comment on map B, because I think there's somebody who's explaining that map B was their preference. In my mind, it splits some communities of interest right down the middle, which I find a little uncomfortable. In going to map D, we're going to make some compromises. One compromise is the Burlingame Hills, and I do see how that would be great to keep it together, but I played a lot of the different variations. I never could make that work. And then we also have Burlingame Park, which we also have the little section that goes in with our central district. And again, it's a compromise. I think it's a good compromise, and I'm ready to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do concur. I think draft D kind of takes all the different perspectives and the input into consideration and does the best job of trying to harmonize them. I won't repeat all the reasons why, because colleagues articulated it well. The only other things I would add that I like about draft D is that in draft D, there are 2 districts. So 2 council members will have connections to the Bayfront, which is related to sea level rise. That's an existential issue that we have coming. And I'd rather have more than one council member have their eye on the ball there. Not that all council members won't, but I like that it's a part of 2 districts, and also that 2 districts also share Broadway, have an interest in dealing with Broadway and the grade separation and all the train and traffic that happens there. I also like that there's a downtown area that sort of leans into multi-unit residential development that has a potential, critical mass of renters. And I think the others are compromises too that make reasonable sense. It's interesting that communities of interest, the law is telling us we develop communities of interest so that we empower voices for effective representation. So you're kind of leaning into special interests when we draw these. That's what we have to do. That's part of this process. At the same time, I think Councilmember Brownrigg articulated it beautifully. We have a tradition in this city of always doing what's in the best interest for the entire community. And I have great faith that we'll continue with that, even with district elections. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Beach. I think all my colleagues did a nice job with their summaries, and I would agree with them. I think Plan D is the best map that I see amongst the options presented to us. I think Map D incorporated especially concerns from our last meeting to this meeting. No map is going to be perfect. But we try to make the best of the situation and incorporate as many issues that have come up with our community members. And I will say they had plenty of opportunity to give input. Our city clerk was everywhere in Burlingame. And also Andrew, who works for our city, was out with her. And so I think they did a very good job with the outreach. I think community members had ample time and plenty of opportunities to learn about the process and give their feedback. So again, kudos to the city clerk and Mr. Mitchell for all the work that you've put into this. I do think, and I agree with Councilmember Brownrigg, and he explained it eloquently, that the current council has done a really good job looking at our community holistically. And I do hope futuristically, no matter who runs for council, that they keep that same value, that you do not go into this looking at your district only, and what your wants are. Because that to me is not a sense of community. That to me is being exclusive and not inclusive. And so I do hope, even though these are district elections, I don't agree with them, but we have to do what we have to do. And I think we've done the best we can under the circumstances. But I do strongly believe, whether it's current council members or future council members, that you do look at this city as a whole. Everyone experiences many issues here in the community, and many are similar. The ultimate goal is to make Burlingame the best community we can make it. And if we can accomplish that goal, then we have great people. And so just keep that in mind for everyone that's on the call today, that yes, we may be districted. However, when it comes to ultimate decisions, it is a panel of 5 council members that do represent the whole community. So on that note, I think we've given direction. We have a consensus on Plan D.
Thank you, Council.
Very good. All right. Next on our agenda is item 9. Oh, sorry, I'm lost track here.
9C.
9C, which is the introduction of an ordinance of the City of Burlingame amending Chapter 2.25 of Title II of the Burlingame Municipal Code regarding limits on campaign contributions. May we have staff report? And this is Megan again. This is your night, Megan.
My show tonight. Mayor and council members, the council has had several discussions since August 16th about whether we're going to amend or repeal the city's campaign contribution ordinance. And then at the November 1st meeting, we heard overwhelmingly from the community that they wanted us to have city contribution limits. So council directed staff to bring back an ordinance amending the city's contribution limits ahead of the 2022 election cycle. And at that meeting, council members suggested that the ordinance should include the following: making contribution limits the same for both organizations and individuals, creating a set dollar amount for the escalator of the contribution limit, decreasing the contribution limit now that the city is moving to district elections, creating a penalty specific to violations of the contribution limit, establishing a voluntary expenditure limit, and creating a lower threshold for the dollar amount that needs to be reported on the campaign disclosure statement. So I'll just briefly go through how we've addressed these suggestions in the proposed ordinance. So contribution limits. The proposed ordinance sets the limits the same for both individuals and organizations. And beginning in 2022, the limit will be $350. So in the past election cycle, contribution limit for individuals was $719.93. And for organizations, it was $1,439.87. However, now that we're moving to district elections, candidates will only be campaigning to roughly 1/5 of the city. So these decreased rates of $350 reflect that it's approximately still 50% of what the previous individual contribution limit was and 25% of the previous organizational contribution limit. So it's still ahead of that 1/5 when you look at it that way. Then we've created an escalator. So in the past, we went through a CPI calculation that always ended in a weird cent, and we're going to get rid of that. We're proposing instead that we increase it every 2 years by $25. And this creates a nice even number, which will be great for me. But more importantly, it'll be easier for our candidates as they can clearly know what the contribution limit is at all times. And included in the ordinance is that we will be publishing and making it known what the contribution limits are every December before the elections at a council meeting so that everyone is on the same page going into the next election. The other thing that was discussed and that's come up a lot in the county lately is in-kind contributions. And how do we make candidates aware of that in-kind contributions still have to be under the limits? And so we amended the language in the definitions section so that it includes it points to the State Political Reform Act and it points to the California Code of Regulations, which really spell out what in-kind contributions are and what candidates can and can't take as in-kind contributions. And I think more importantly, this is something that city clerks will have to start handing out to candidates when they pull their papers. So I've kind of written that into my own procedures as well. The next thing is the anonymous contributions and disclosures in campaign statements. So right now under state law, candidates and committees are required to report $100 or more in their campaign disclosure statement by spelling out who gave it to them, job, and the address of the individual or organization. Anything lower than that, they report in their total cash contribution received, but they're not reporting out specifically who gave it to them. So I reviewed how other cities have kind of handled that $100, and a lot of cities on the peninsula and in Santa Clara have actually lowered it down so that it kind of is equal to what they're, to how much they're limiting candidates from raising. So we propose lowering it to $50. So anything over $50, you would have to disclose who gave it to you. And I think that this number is fair because it also still allows for that kind of passing of the hat way of raising funds when you're at a campaign party and somebody gives you $20, you know, for your campaign, that you won't have to report who that person is, their name, and all their information. And my next staff report after this one kind of addresses how we'll nicely be able to monitor all of this. And then the other thing that came up was voluntary expenditure limits. So the council originally asked if there was a way that we could cap the total amount of contributions a candidate can raise. And after a lot of discussions with the city attorney, it was determined that no, this would infringe on one's First Amendment rights. But a voluntary expenditure limit could be imposed. And expenditures refer to how much a candidate spends on their campaign. Contributions would be like their total amount that they raise. So we can limit how much, we can voluntarily limit how much they spend on their campaign. So we've created a program for this, and under this program, if a candidate signs on to an agreement agreeing to the voluntary expenditure limit, the benefit they would get is that we would publish their name, all the names of the candidates who have agreed to the limit on the city's website, on our social media, and then I'll do announcements in the newspapers in Chinese, Spanish, and English. And then in reverse, if they end up violating the voluntary expenditure limit, we'll publish their names in newspapers and on social media that they have violated the expenditure limit. So how do we come up with the expenditure limit? Well, it's all outlined in the proposed ordinance, but the gist of it is that it's $5 per resident in the electoral district. And the number of residents in the electoral district is determined by the last census. This means in some districts, you'll get to raise just a little bit more than others based on your population. For this upcoming election, because we won't clearly have our districts defined in time, we've settled on a term of $30,000. And this is in looking at what was raised in previous elections and what other cities have set as their limits. But I give an example in my staff report that in 2024, if one district has 6,000 people, they'll be able to raise approximately $30,400, while if another district has 6,500 people, they'll be able to raise they'll be able to spend $32,000. So what this does is no one has to sign on to it. It's voluntary, but if people do, it creates kind of like this generous, here's where we're all at. We're all on the same playing field when it comes to spending funds on a campaign. It's much in line with like the Fair Political Practices Act request for everyone to sign on to clean campaigns. The proposed ordinance also includes an escalator for the voluntary expenditure limit where it'll go up by 25 cents every election cycle. So 2024, it'll be $5. In 2026, it'll be $5.25 and thereafter. And then that base number of residents will change with the census. So in 2030, we'll change the numbers with whatever the new residential numbers are for the district. And then lastly in this is the penalties. So I looked a lot at what other cities have done, and very large cities set up commissions where the public is allowed to report any violations or perceived violation to them. In these cities, review and investigate these violations and then take that into consideration. That doesn't necessarily work for a smaller city like us. So what we did was utilize languages that other cities had where it creates some flexibility for me, where if it's a clear-cut violation, we can enforce a fine on the individual. But if it's in a gray area, we can send it over to the DA's office for investigation. And so that is the end of my staff report.
Great, thank you, Megan. Are there any questions of Megan? Okay, so what I will do is I will open it up for public comment.
Do you want me to read the title of the
Oh,
ordinance?
my apologies. Yes, please do so.
An ordinance of the City of Burlingame amending Chapter 2.25 of Title II of the Burlingame Municipal Code regarding limits on campaign contributions. CEQA determination exempt pursuant to state CEQA guidelines, sections 15378 and 15061B3.
Can I have a motion to waive further reading?
Move to waive further reading and introduce the ordinance.
Second.
Okay. I'll open it up.
Oh, I'll do a roll call.
Oh, actually do roll call first, please. Yes.
Councilmember Beach?
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ortiz?
Yes.
Mayor O'Brien?
Yes. So that motion passes. So let's go to our attendees and let us start with Laura Hines.
Yes, thank you. I just would like to address the entire city council and thank you for turning this around and actually improving the election process of Burlingame. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Okay, I will close the public hearing. Megan, did we get any emails?
We did not.
Okay, very good. So then I will start with Vice Mayor Ortiz, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted, there's a quick comment, if I could, about the process and what we were talking about before. We were considering removing the burden of this enforcement from our staff, which is why we considered just going with the state mandated minimums, which are quite a bit higher than what we had here before. Once we determined that actually the public outcry was very loud, and so we decided we would go back, and at that point, it's back on our staff to do the enforcement. And so at that point, we decided that it would be a good idea to make it a little more stringent since we're going to control it now. And that's how we arrived where we are. A lot has been said about what those of us who were in favor of going to the state standards, our motivations were, and it was simply just to lighten the load of our staff. But now we're going there, we're making it a little more stringent. I think we're doing the right thing. So thank you all.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I very much appreciate the work of the city clerk, the very quick work to turn this around. I completely agree with Ms. Hines that this is a great improvement where we were before, and certainly where we were where we might have gone. So I think this is really much better. And thank you so much, Megan. I would point out that the spending limit is $30,000 for a district with roughly 6,000 people in it. I have never spent $30,000 running citywide. So that's a very generous allotment, but I understand the math, and I don't have a problem with it. But boy, if you can't win in a district with $30,000, then you got some bigger issues than being elected. Anyway, so I appreciate the hard work by by the city clerk. I will end with this, which is, and I said this right at the very beginning of creating districts, which is, I think this council should consider, in a way we never have before, the possibility of term limits. I remain concerned that running within a district, somebody could kind of own that district for election after election. So not for here, it's not been agendized, anything like that. But I think the flip side to running in a small district ought to be some sort of term limit, or at least I'd like to have that conversation. I'm sort of open-minded, but I worry about somebody being just entrenched in a district for 25 years or something. So anyway, thank you very much, Megan, for all the hard work, and I support very much this this ordinance.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you. And I want to thank the Vice Mayor for, I think, articulating the position of some members on the council very accurately. I appreciate that. I support this ordinance. I've been excited and talking to Megan about it for actually well before we started this work. So I think it creates a fair baseline from which new candidates can run against incumbents, and it hopefully doesn't lend itself to biases one way or another. And I think it sets a fair table, and it also helps people with the expectations of how much money they might need to raise, what it costs to run a campaign. And my favorite part of this is that individuals and corporations or businesses have the same power with their dollars. And I think that's really important. So we're not going to have any particular special interests or businesses that can write checks. And in any system, there's ways to get around this. We all know there's independent expenditures and other things that can happen. But I think in terms of setting fair boundaries and creating appropriate expectations, this hits the mark. And I appreciate all the work on it, Megan and Lisa. Thank you. And Michael, I think you were involved, Michael Gina too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think our city clerk did a great job on this, and I propose we bring it back for a second reading and adoption. Thanks.
Very good. Actually, that sounds maybe like a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, so motion made by Councilmember Beach, seconded by Councilmember Brownrigg. Before we go on the vote, I just want to say a couple words. And I do thank Vice Mayor Ortiz, who articulated kind of why many of us voted the way we did the first time around. And so from that, the direction turned, and I think we've come up with a pretty good ordinance that is before us. I do want to mention as a follow-up, so our constituents know, because many of them, I think, were on the last call when Assemblymember Mullen was on the call, and we had the discussion about his legislation and how it is somewhat flawed. And so he said that he was open to discussing this further to see if there is any potential of, making changes. So we have a meeting that will be set up in January. So I just wanted people to know that there will be follow-up from that discussion from our last meeting. So on that note, let's take a roll call on the motion that was made by Councilmember Beach, seconded by Councilmember Brownrigg.
Councilmember Beach?
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson?
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ortiz?
Yes.
Mayor O'Brien?
Yes. So motion passes 5-0, and we will see it at our next meeting. And again, thank you very much, Megan. Good job, you and all the other staff that were involved. Okay, on to item 9D. The introduction of an ordinance of the City of Burlingame adding Chapter 2.26 to the Title II of the Burlingame Municipal Code, authorizing electronic and paper methods of filing campaign financial disclosure statements.
This is me again. This one is really just to make my life and staff's life easier. So we talked with Netfile, which is a company that runs online system to do file your campaign statements and your Form 700s. And I had our HR director on the call with me. We were both very impressed with a extremely thorough presentation of how this apparatus works. I've also worked with getting Netfile in when I worked at the county elections office there too. So what this is great, it's flexible because anyone that has to file Form 700 for the city, whether it be a commission member or staff or council, you'll be able to do it online. And you can also adjust your Form 700 so that it talks with the other maybe county commissions that you have to file it with, which I know some of our council members, such as Council Member Brownrigg, has to file, I think, at least 7 each year. And so we're hoping to make his life a little bit easier. It's also really easy for our staff, as most of them are just filing the first page. And so they can get it done within seconds. So hopefully it lowers my work time in trying to get people to file their Form 700s annually. The other thing it does is it has a campaign statement system where you can file your campaign statements online. And for those who don't know, candidates have to regularly file campaign disclosure statements so that we can see what they're raising and who they're obtaining funds from. This acts almost as like an accounting system where you enter in the person's name and you'll be able to plop in all the information of what you got from them, and it will help you tally it up from those individuals and then total contributions that you've raised. So it's a really easy tool for both campaigns, but also for me. It takes the guesswork out of things. The city clerk's office will no longer have to create Excel spreadsheets of what our candidates are raising, because we'll have it all in this nice system. In order to do all this, and why it's before you as an ordinance, the state requires us to register our online system. And there's $1,000 registration fee, and we have to pass an ordinance saying we'll accept things that way. So we're doing the ordinance and for that checkpoint, and then Netfile has agreed to pay our filing fee with the FPPC, and we'll be handling our application and all the paperwork that goes along with it, which is amazing. And so I'd ask that you introduce this ordinance so that we can get started on this project.
Make a motion
Thank
to
you,
introduce
Megan.
the ordinance, if that's okay. Sorry, Madam Mayor.
That's okay.
Again.
It's just late.
I'll read the title for you first, council member.
Okay.
An
Okay.
ordinance of the city of Burlingame adding chapter 2.26 to title 2 of the Burlingame Municipal Code, authorizing electronic and paper methods of filing campaign finance disclosure statements, CEQA determination exempt pursuant to state CEQA guidelines, sections 15378 and 15601B3.
Okay.
Yes, I'll make the
and
motion.
Councilmember Colson. Okay.
Sorry.
And I'll second again.
And I'll do roll call. Councilmember Beach,
Yes.
Councilmember Colson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg.
If it helps you, Megan, then yes.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Ortiz,
I'm all about Megan, yes.
Mayor O'Brien.
Yes. All right, motion passes. So what I'm going to do now is I will open it up for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this item? Okay. If not, I'll close the public comment. City Clerk, did we have any emails?
No, we did not.
Okay, very good. All right, so then on that note, we can actually then direct you then to bring it back for a summary of the ordinance 5 days before the proposed adoption.
Do we need a motion, City Attorney? Is that why you were looking at me?
That's correct.
Sorry.
Yes,
Okay,
we do need a motion for that, please.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so
Beach.
motion made by Vice Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Beach.
And I'll do roll
Now
call.
we're good. After roll call.
Councilmember Beach,
Yes.
Councilmember Colson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ortiz,
Yes.
Mayor O'Brien.
Yes, motion passes. All right, now to our city clerk, you can publish the summary. Thank you. A little out of order this evening. Okay, item 10A, we have a discussion of the parklet rent fee structure, parklet design requirements, and the extension of the parklet program through December 31st, 2022. And I think Director Gardner takes this.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, let me get myself set up here. Thank you, Mayor O'Brien and members of the council. And let's get this here. So this is a discussion of parklet fee and rent rate structures. And to kind of go back in time and review where we left off before, back in August 16th of 2021, there was council discussion and agreement to extend the parklet program for 1 year with a review in August 2022. There was interest in indemnification language, interest in fees to cover cleaning and other potential costs that are being incurred by the city, increase in cleaning on Burlingame Avenue, and a consensus that parklets should be used for at least 4 days a week. So we gravitated, and let me back up for a moment. We initially went to the Economic Development Subcommittee to talk about a fee and rent framework. And just to clarify, a fee is really to capture city costs, whereas a rent is meant to capture the value of a public good that is being used for private purposes so that it's not a gift of public funds. So that's why we're using fee and rent as kind of two different terms. Mountain View, we looked at as a program because it's been established as a long-term program, whereas most of the other programs, including Burlingame's, have come from the pandemic, and there is interest in having those become longer term, but we're looking for an example where it was really designed for that kind of long-term structure. There's an application fee. There's an annual rent of $6 a square foot for the sidewalk space, which is meant to cover cleaning and other maintenance. And then a $1,200 rent for the use of the space itself, permit renewal, and then a minimum 5-year license agreement and indemnity agreement. We did look at other cities, and Burlingame, we're probably in about the same place as a lot of our peers here in San Mateo County, in that they've either recently enacted or in the process of enacting rent and fee structures. San Bruno does not have any fees, but they've got a cap of 5 parklets total. So they're looking at this really as an economic development opportunity. South San Francisco has a $500 a year fee. San Mateo has a $500 application fee plus $250 per space per year. And Redwood City is discussing, so they've gotten about the same place where we're at, where they're looking at structures. We did look a little further afield as well. Los Gatos has a whopping $8,700 to apply, but then in reverse, up to 75% of the construction costs of $40,000 are subsidized. So there's a higher fee to buy in, but then the city pitches in for the actual construction. It's a pretty different process or program, but we did want to at least mention it. And then through SVITA, which is the Silicon Valley Economic Development Association, we heard of Capitola, which is looking at $3,400 per year, plus a $500 deposit. And that deposit's interesting. That's in order to, should there be an abandoned parklet and the city has to dismantle it, that's meant to offset some of the costs of taking down a parklet. They've also limited it to 25 parklets, which is half of the current. So they're wanting to really narrow down and create a longer term but smaller program than what they have right now. So what we looked at, the fees and the rent are, on the one hand, the cleaning fees, which have been estimated to be $300 per parklet per month. Now, admittedly, cleaning fees is something new. Right now, and in the past, there have been encroachment permits for use of the sidewalks which did not try to capture the cleaning fees. So this is following council direction to try to capture some of those costs, but admittedly, it is a new fee. There is not a precedent for this. And then the rent for 300 square feet is the question mark. The average parklet is approximately 300 square feet, whether it's parallel or angular, they come out to be about the same. It's a lot of math here and it's in the staff report. It's late. I'm not going to go over all of it, but just to sort of explain the methodology. In the top photo on the right is a storefront, which leases for approximately $42.71 per square foot per year. On the left is outdoor seating, which the city has set a rent at that's 9% of that commercial rent. So if we use that same methodology where the parklet or the outdoor seating is a percentage, and in this case 9% of the going commercial rate, the rents are a little higher in Burlingame, so that would give us a parklet rent of $1,485 per parklet per year. So the sample Burlingame framework would be the city cost of the $300 per parklet per month for cleaning, the rent of $1,485 per parklet per year, and then whether or not we wanted to consider a deposit. I think this did come up in the subcommittee as a discussion item, so we're adding this in as a potential additional should this be of interest. There would also be the indemnification and license terms, and then basic design standards for both aesthetics as well as public health and safety. And then last, the staff report mentions a couple of questions that have come up, and this has been what we've been experiencing and people have been asking us about as the program has continued. First of all, should parklets be specific to the property or to the tenant? So for example, if the tenant moves out, does the new tenant get to keep that parklet, or does the parklet go away with that tenant? And then in instances where we've had tenants give permission to their neighbor to provide some space in a parklet, could that be revoked? Should, for example, the tenant decide they want a parklet for themselves after all, and with a certain amount of notice, could they revoke their prior approval or authorization? So it's a lot here presented very quickly. The staff report does provide more of the analysis, but we are here for questions and discussion. And I'll note this is also very interdisciplinary, so I may be calling on colleagues from other departments as well to help with the questions and discussion.
Thank you, Director Gardner. Let's start with Councilmember Brownrigg, followed by Vice Mayor Ortiz, please.
So I just wanted to quickly set some context for my colleagues. We did not have a lot of input from restaurateurs. It's not for want of trying, but I just wanted to share the Economic Subcommittee did not have a slew of input from restaurateurs. So as we consider this tonight, I just wanted you to know that. Also, the cleaning fee is, of course, because it has to be by law, cost recovery. So that's what Public Works estimates. But $300 a month for 12 months is $3,600. So I mean, it's more than twice what we're proposing in rent. And I personally am a little concerned that might be too high, but I look forward to the conversation. But I just wanted you to know where that number came from. All right, thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just curious, one question on the Capitola where they're trying to limit it to 25. How are they going to figure out who gets the 25? Is it first come, first serve?
It's a lottery.
Oh, lottery. Oh, interesting. Okay, and then back to the comments that, because we have talked about this many times in the Economic Development Subcommittee, and like Councilmember Brownrigg said, we really haven't had a lot of input from the restaurateurs. We have had it kind of secondhand by some people who have talked to them. But at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is have a mechanism so that we know that the parklets are being used. Otherwise, give me back my parking spaces, which is very important. And I think it's been very successful for some businesses and not so much for others. And so we need to kind of separate those and be able to get back some of those parking spaces back online. So, but thank you to the economic director, the community development director, for all your work on this. I think that we have a pretty good outline, and I think we can come up with something pretty quick.
Okay, do we have any other questions before I open it up to the public? Okay, I do have a quick question to our subcommittee. Did the businesses know you were discussing this? I mean, what type of involvement did you guys get?
I'll let Kevin speak to that, but we always try to advertise as widely as we can, right, Kevin? I mean,
Yeah, so I think during all this, we were having ongoing conversations with the bids. So both the downtown bid and then the Broadway bid. And I know at least, I do recall the Broadway bid representative there. I think the downtown bid.
We're both there, yeah.
And then presumably they've also been in touch with their members. And then we do have a standing list of people who are interested in everything the committee does. And we did have some of those individuals there as well.
And one of those individuals, I was going to say, one of those individuals is a landlord that has many restaurants as tenants. So I think he, when he speaks, I think he knows what he's talking about.
So from those conversations, were there any particular concerns that they brought up with this potential proposal?
I'd say that, the numbers didn't raise eyebrows necessarily. There was an interest in perhaps an additional condition to ensure the longevity of the parklet materials. So either painting or staining them or doing something just so that right now they look really great. A year from now, you just want to make sure they're maintained. There were maybe different thoughts on aesthetics, but we did transmit back that the direction from council in the previous meeting was to be fairly simple on aesthetics and just focus on the orange barriers and the level floors and not really get into a lot of detail. So that was really the gist of most of the discussion.
Okay, very good.
I was going to say, Madam Mayor, that my recollection is that the discussion was more about aesthetics than any of the fees. So painted wood.
yeah, and I concur, except I personally feel we didn't hear a lot of directly affected interests. We indirectly heard from them, but that's why I wanted to start with that, Madam Mayor. I think we can't assume that this is widely understood in the restaurant community. I don't know how they feel about a $5,000 price tag to have a parklet. But, as this council discussed, whatever it was a couple of months ago, we did want to set a number high enough where people wouldn't just have empty space because it was cheap. That was one of the factors that we were thinking through. What's fair, but also what makes sure that people are going to turn this into an actual asset and not just camp on parking spaces. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. I will open it up to the public. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak on this item? Okay, doesn't look like it, so I will close the public comment. Megan, did we receive any emails at all?
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then now back to the discussion. And I think there's two questions I think that Director Gardner poses. Does this go with the property or does it go with the tenant? And then the second question, if I remember correctly, was, well, what happens if a new tenant comes in? Then do they reapply or do they carry over that initial kind of lease for the parklet? So if colleagues can address maybe those two questions also. So our staff has some direction.
Right, and the rates overall, of course.
Correct, yeah, that it was a given, but those two questions were in addition to the proposal. All right, who would like to start? Councilmember Coulson.
I'll go ahead and start here. So I think that you probably do need some type of permitting fee. I'm seeing what it is in some of the other cities, and I kind of would leave it to staff to work on that to be just a regular, some sort of reasonable amount. The annual rent, I would probably just round that up to $1,500, make it easy. I think you have basis for that. The cleaning fee, you know, the number one complaint that I'm hearing from the restaurants as well as the residents is the streets are filthy, dirty with the parklets. And so if it, you know, Director Mertuzza could probably talk about how often, but I know we have a couple people we've recently hired and that were out there walking along the street. And I think their presence is just very helpful so they can spot clean or help people understand how to clean their own parklets. Because, you know, even if the businesses try, it's late at night, it's dark, they're trying to close up, they're trying to get out of there, you know, and in the morning they're trying to get back open. It's just really hard for them to like steam clean it. And there's issues around like, you know, water use and all kinds of things like that. Like they're not really supposed to be out there, you know, with water buckets when we're in a drought. So I think us owning that and taking on that responsibility and recovering those costs are fine. If it turns out the cost to maintain the streets is actually lower, we could then reduce the fee next year or in 6 months. You know, we could set it at a fee and then turn around and redo it. And then I also think that with regard to parklet user close or sell their business, would there be a new tenant or could the new tenant take over and obtain? I think they should have to get a new parklet permit again, just to make sure they're interested in it. And then I think that those parklets should be transferable. I don't see any reason that so long as it's within the context of the amount of time we've given for the parklets, that the person should be able to do it. And if it's, say, for example, shorter than the 1 year, we can prorate that initial fee. And with permission between businesses be revocable. Yeah, I mean, I think you might make a decision to change, but what I would probably put into that is say, you know, if you give someone permission and then say the lease changes and a new business comes in, they want a parklet, they should be entitled to it. But if you give away the space in front of you and then you want it back, I don't think it's fair to make the business that just invested $40,000 in the parklet have to now deconstruct their parklet. If you want it revoked, you should have to pay at least 50% or some percentage, if not the whole thing, to have their parklet rebuilt within their, you know, one way you could do it within their guidelines. So I think that would make people think long and hard about whether they want to let those parklets go into their right of way. Just because you've got to have some fair, you can't build a $40,000 parklet and then your neighbor says, you know what, I kind of changed my mind, you got to take it down next month. That just doesn't seem fair. Or you can't revoke it for at least a year. You know, maybe there's a time mechanism in there. Say once you give permission, they invest the money, it's good for a year. And then if you want them to take it down, maybe they have to pay for it, but they're guaranteed for a certain amount of time. So either of those kind of solutions could work. I think the really important concept here, which I appreciated Director Gardner saying, is this sort of gift of public funds. These are public spaces. We are supporting the businesses by them. We have made a gift. I think the whole community wanted to make a gift, but at a certain point in time, we do have a responsibility to make sure that the lost parking revenue, the costs to do this are shared, you know, by the businesses themselves, who do seem to be doing really, really well with the parklets.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I concur with Councilmember Coulson. I think it's, I like the framework that's proposed. I think we have to charge for the cleaning. It's essential. I concur. It's wonderful that the businesses are thriving out there with the parklets, but they are thriving and they need to pitch in to help us offset other costs. I'm fine with them being transferable for all the reasons Councilmember Colson mentioned, and in her nuance. I think that all makes good sense. The other thing is, it's just we don't want these things being torn down and rebuilt. It's just a waste of sustainable resources. It just doesn't pass the common sense test. So I think that's just another a good reason to allow some transferability if we can put some reasonable parameters around it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Beach. Vice Mayor Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to agree with everything that Councilmember Colson said, except for I really not sure that I agree with the transferability. I think that each business should make their own assessment as to whether it's going to be worth it for them or not. So if they somewhere in the middle of the year that these guys pay, they assume it and now they get it for free for the rest of the year, I think at that point they should have to do a new application because it's a new business, different. But as far as the transfer, as far as the neighbors and allowing that, I do agree that there should be a time limit so that the people who invested money in the parklets have time to recoup the value a little bit. So I like the 1 year idea. I said, if you give me permission, then you would have to give me 1 year to tear it down if you don't want it. And that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Brownrigg? I didn't see your hand, but I'm
so used to me talking. I feel bad that you would just assume that I'd have my. No, I agree with Councilman Cole. I agree with all the prior comments, and I'm happy with the regime as proposed, and I'm happy to settle with whatever the consensus is on transferability.
Very good, Councilmember Brownrigg. I agree with most things that were mentioned. I do think, and this is something I agree with Vice Mayor Ortiz, that when there is a new tenant that comes in, though, I think there should be a new, they should apply for their own permit because their needs might be different. And so I don't want them changing something around and then our departments don't know about it until after the fact. So I'd rather just be kind of straight up front and have them, a new tenant apply. But everything else I do agree with, and especially this cleaning fee, because, you know, I walk up and down Burlingame Avenue and the side streets and those sidewalks after all the money that's been spent on making sure Burlingame Avenue looks nice and all the landscaping and, you know, wider sidewalks and so forth. We really want to keep them clean as much as possible. So I'd hate to see too much wear and tear and we're not maintaining it. So, and I do think it is, you know, the business's responsibility now to pay into that. You know, they've gone through some rough times and we help them as much as possible. But most of those businesses are thriving and they have more people now than they did in the past because we allowed the parklets. So I do think this cleaning is essential in addition to the other fees that have been mentioned. Back to Councilmember Colson, followed by our Director Matusa.
Thank you. So I just want to make it clear that what I meant by transferability was that they had to renew the permit. I completely agree with that because you're completely right, Vice Mayor. You might want to tweak it or put something different. I think they need to go through the permitting process. What I really meant by transferability was we're not going to force somebody when their lease is up or they terminate. We're not going to force the landlord to tear it down just so another tenant can turn around and rebuild it in 3 weeks, which is to Councilwoman Beach's point, trying to be efficient with resources and including our own, like not wanting to haul away those orange barriers and then bring it back in a week. So I think we're all actually on the same page of that. The other question I just really had, this is really a question for Director Mertuzar, Director Gardner, which was, I had someone who has a parklet call me regarding our staff going out and mentioning something about tables having to be a certain distance. And so is there protocol that's going to go on that we're going to tell them how many feet away their tables have to be or how many tables they can have? Is that what's included in the permitting and the ordinance?
So good. Good evening, Council. Good evening, Council. I will answer Councilmember Colson's question first, and then I'll go back to my comments I was going to make. So the question regarding the staff going around on the avenue and speaking to the restaurant owners or operators about the distancing of tables, that is actually related to the tables and chairs encroachment permits that they have currently in file with the city, and they have shown the exact number of chairs and tables and their distances. So city is trying to make sure that they are compliant with their original permit. So, and also they're not placing those tables and chairs on property beyond their limits so that there's a liability issue. So we're trying to make sure.
Clarify, Syed, if I may, this is for sidewalks. There's two separate things going on.
Right.
What Syed is talking about is only on sidewalks. We don't actually care what they do on their parklets, as long as they're not, creating ADA issues and whatnot. So they can jam a whole lot of tables into the parklets. They can't jam a whole lot of tables into their sidewalk frontage because that's in violation of the existing permits they had long before COVID ever started. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, that's what I meant with the tables and chairs and sidewalks. The other issue I was mentioning is that with the transferability is that each parklet permit would have their own insurance certificate and their own liability. So it cannot be transferred. So if somebody were to assume a parklet, they would have to resubmit the application with the updated insurance certificate and all that information. So I just wanted, so it may be, they may be able to physically use the space if they wanted to, if that's, if it meets the requirement, but from an application point of view and insurance point of view, that needs to be renewed or updated. That's it.
Thank you, Director Martusa. Does anyone want to add anything? I think we've given pretty good direction to you, Director Gardner. So can you tell us maybe what the next step is?
So I may need to get some input from either city attorney or city manager. We do need to have a, given that fees are involved, a public hearing for adopting the fees. And we would need to have the staff report serve as a fee study or somehow have a fee study in order to support that.
So what time frame do you think we're looking at? Because I'm sure the businesses probably want to know this.
So I think certainly we want to do it as soon as we can because we want to get these in place. And remember, fees are a two-step deal, and then it takes a little while to go into effect. So given that, what we might, I guess the question for the council is, do you want us to wait and do the whole shebang at once, meaning the fees and the rent all together, or should we start with the rent and then layer on the fees when they're ready to go? Because that is a bit of a time lag. My preference, given that this has been going on for quite some time, and I see a thumbs up down in the corner and a head nod, is to get the rent started sooner rather than later, and then work through the fee process and just let people know, hey, we're doing this, and then this other thing is coming as well.
I think that's a good idea. It looks like my colleagues are on the same page. So I see a yes from Councilmember Beach, Councilmember Brownrigg, Vice Mayor Ortiz, okay, and Councilmember Coulson.
So maybe at the end of this item, which I think we're wrapping up fairly quickly, if we could get a motion to that effect at the end, so we'll have an official record that you've given us direction to do that. So that would just be on the rent piece of it.
Okay, who would like to make the motion?
I'll make a motion to approve, to propose that the city adopt a rent regime as described in the staff report tonight, to be followed by cleaning fees at the appropriate moment.
And if I could just ask, I'm sorry, Councilmember Coulson had mentioned bumping it from $1,495 up to $1,500 just to make it a smooth, I think, are we good there?
Yes, so
okay.
I amend the motion to be $1,500, and any future escalators would be considered by the council.
Great, thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, motion made by Councilmember Brownrick, seconded by Vice Mayor Ortiz. Megan, can we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Beach,
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ortiz,
Yes.
Mayor O'Brien.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. All right, on to item number 11, council committee and activities reports and announcements. Does anyone have any? Okay, then future agenda items. I do want to hopefully put a future agenda item on our futuristically not urgent, but I've received a few emails from constituents in relation to the possibility of putting in the license plate readers due to the increased burglaries, car burglaries, retail burglaries. I know we have talked about this in the past at the council level, and there was mixed views on it, and we did not go forward with it, mainly due to privacy issues. So I just wanted to know, is it worth discussing again?
I'll second that idea, Madam Mayor. I think it's definitely worth a conversation.
Okay, and it looks like Vice Mayor Ortiz is on board too. So if we can maybe, and I did talk to our city attorney, Michael Gina, about this and sent an email to our chief of police. So if we can maybe get some information together that we can look at futuristically, that would be greatly appreciated. And like I said, it isn't urgent that we have to have it right away, but I'd like to see it in the next few months if possible. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we had a future agenda item in the past where we've talked about even some possible framework for how we think about these kind of these issues that are related to getting people's images and license plate readers. There are some privacy issues, and that is something that maybe we could discuss in tandem. And I know that we've had some conversations at the staff level, and I think a future agenda item in the past. So maybe we could do those in tandem.
Were you done? You wasn't sure if you're still talking when you're muted. That's fine with me. I think some of that goes hand in hand, so we might as well.
I think it'll be all part of the same staff report because I don't think you can do one without the other.
I know when we discussed it previously, that was all intertwined together. Okay, any other future agenda items? Any acknowledgements? Councilmember Coulson.
Sorry. Yes. So it came to my attention just around Thanksgiving that one of our beloved teachers at Burlingame Intermediate School, who also was a Burlingame resident, Margie DeWolf, passed away from her battle with cancer. And I know many of you had children at the school and probably had your children taught by her. And then she actually lived in downtown Burlingame. I know it's been a long meeting, so I'm not going to go through her whole amazing life, but just wanted to make sure that we did close one of our meetings in memory of someone who had given their life in service to the children and families of Burlingame, Margie DeWolf, who taught math at Burlingame Intermediate School.
Let's take some time to acknowledge that. Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Coulson, for bringing that to our attention. And then we can close the meeting. Our next city council meeting is December 20th. And actually that will be, we'll have a regular meeting followed by the reorganization of the city council. So it'll be a light agenda with our reorganization. And then on that note, we'll adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night, all. Thank you.
Night all.
Good night.